right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 22nd, 2023 special meeting of the Boulder City Council. We're going to get started with a short special meeting and then move to a study session facilitated by Councilmember Mark Wallach. And we're going to get started on our meeting with an announcement. So the 2023 Boards and Commissions mid-year recruitment period is now open from May 29th to July 2nd, 2023. We are accepting applications for the following 8 boards or commissions: the Beverage Licensing Authority, the Boulder Junction Access District Parking and also Travel Demand Management, the Downtown Management Commission, the Landmarks Board, the University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission, the Open Space Board of Trustees, that's a new opening, as well as the Environmental Advisory Board, also a new opening. You can find the board and commission descriptions and vacancies online at www.bouldercolorado.gov/boards-commissions. And if you have any questions or need assistance, please contact the city clerk's office at bouldercolorado.gov or call 303-441-4222. And that concludes our announcement. So I will go ahead and call our meeting to order. And Elisha, if you could do the roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. We will start tonight, as usual, with Councilmember Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkers.
Present.
Friend.
Here.
Joseph.
Present.
Spear.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Wallach.
Right here.
Councilmember Weiner.
Present.
And Yates.
Here.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much. And now I'd like to ask for a motion to amend the agenda to make a few changes, and that is to add item 1A, which is a declaration honoring Judge Linda Cook's years of service, to be presented by Councilmember Folkers, to add 2B, which is an introduction, first reading consideration of a motion to order published by title only and adopt by emergency measure, Ordinance 8583, imposing a moratorium on the police oversight panel in the city of Boulder and setting forth related details, and item 2C, which is consideration of a motion to appoint 2 council members to serve as ad hoc liaisons to the Better Public Meetings Project.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Could I get a show of hands? All in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. The agenda has been amended. So if we can then move on to our new item 1A, which is our declaration honoring Judge Cook's years of service. So Lauren, if you could take it away, please.
Thank you, Aaron. In 2001, Judge Linda Cook joined the Boulder Municipal Court as a relief judge. Judge Cook was appointed to be the presiding judge in 2002. Judge Cook has been a transformational and inspirational leader during her long tenure at the Boulder Municipal Court. During her judicial career, Judge Cook continually sought to identify and implement data-driven and evidence-based practices for the various populations served by the court. She was not afraid to pursue innovations that were emerging nationally, thus enabling the Boulder Municipal Court to join the ranks of early adopters of structural improvements to the criminal justice system. Early in her career, she partnered with the University of Colorado Boulder to refer quality of life cases committed by CU students to its restorative justice program. This partnership, now in its 18th year, has resulted in hundreds of CU students understanding the impacts of their offenses on community members and repairing the harm caused by those violations through meaningful community service and other sanctions. In an effort to forestall quality of life violations, Judge Cook partnered with the CU Boulder Office of Off-Campus Housing and Neighborhood Relations to develop the curriculum for their community living class. This class proactively educates CU students about potential violations in an effort to prevent them from occurring. Initially, as a court-ordered sanction, it is now offered to CU students moving off campus, both by CU Boulder and local landlords. Underlying many of the violations committed by young adults is the misuse of substances. Judge Cook worked collaboratively with the 20th Judicial District to migrate minor in possession violations, which were previously filed in the county court, to the Boulder Municipal Court. In tandem with that initiative, she worked with CU Boulder to screen for and identify interventions specifically tailored to the young adult age group. Since 2011, the court and CU's health promotion services have been using nationally validated harm reduction programming to address these violations. In 2016, based upon a recommendation from former City Attorney Tom Carr, Judge Cook attended the Community Justice Summit hosted by the Center for Justice Innovation. That conference opened her eyes to the possibilities presented for working with people experiencing homelessness. Later that year, the court hired its first homeless navigator. With the assistance of hands-on navigation services and in partnership with the Boulder Police Department's homelessness outreach team, unhoused individuals were able to successfully traverse the journey from living on the streets to permanently supportive housing. The court's homeless navigator, who largely operated on an outreach basis, became the model for outreach services among the many homeless service providers now operating in Boulder County. In collaboration with the faith community and nonprofits, there are now numerous sites where unhoused individuals can not only access clothing and a meal, they can also be seen by a medical or mental health provider, have their animals seen by a veterinarian, apply for public benefits and identification documents, and complete coordinated entry. In 2019, Judge Cook applied for and received a technical advanced grant to study the possibility of implementing a community court. Based on positive feedback from this endeavor, Judge Cook applied for a community court grant from the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. In 2020, the Boulder Municipal Court was one of the few sites awarded such a grant. The Boulder Municipal Court's community court program is the only community court program that is operating on a mobile basis. As such, it is being studied as a model for the Center for Justice Innovation. In 2018, Judge Cook traveled to Washington, D.C. to join a group of 11 other municipal court judges from across the country to explore the possibility of creating a national municipal court alliance. The initiative was funded by the MacArthur Foundation and hosted by the National League of Cities. As their designated leader, Judge Cook has continued to work with this cohort group and others to grow this organization. In all that she has done, Judge Cook has been guided by the principles of collaboration and procedural fairness. She understands the value of allowing people who appear before her to work with her, to have the opportunity to give voice to their individual perspectives. Even more than her leadership, she is appreciated for her ability to focus on the individual before her and make them feel respected and heard. Throughout her 22-year career with the city, Judge Cook has made a deep friendship with so many of us that work for the city, her colleagues around the state and the nation and the Boulder community. Her grace and fortitude have touched us all. We, the City Council of Boulder, Colorado, recognize, honor, and appreciate the service and significant contributions to the city and community made by Judge Cook. Thank you so much, Judge Cook, for your service to our community.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. And Judge Cook, I wonder if you might say a few words.
Well, it's first of all, thank you for that. It's very overwhelming. I have been so fortunate to have been supported by many city councils throughout my career and by all the collaborations from people both at CU and the city and out, in the community. None of this would have happened with me alone. It requires everybody. And so I've been very fortunate to have the support for going forward with those innovations and the collaboration necessary. So thank you so much.
Well, the thanks are all from us to you, Judge. Just so much appreciate your many years of service to the community, and you will be dearly missed, although we're grateful that you're willing to come back and assist from time to time. And we are looking forward to your final court update here in a few minutes as well. So thank you so much for that, and we'll talk again shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, Alicia, if we can move to our consent agenda, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Tonight's consent agenda is item 2 on the agenda, and it consists of items 2A through 2C.
Very good. I wonder if I might start by calling out 2C, which is about appointments to the Better Public Meeting Project. And Sarah Huntley, are you available to talk about what that is and who we are considering for appointments?
I sure am. Good evening, Council and Mayor, members of Council. Sarah Huntley, the Director of Communication and Engagement. I just wanted to say a few words about this Better Public Meetings project that I referenced in hotline posts in the last couple of weeks. We have been honored to be selected as one of 3 pilot cities to work with the National Civic League, and specifically a new center they're standing up around democracy innovations to really examine the decision-making space. So official public meetings, not engagement that happens prior to that, but meetings and decisions that are made in front of council, specifically how we might be able to learn from lots of things that are happening all over the country, try some new things, hear from our community about what works and doesn't work, and really try to forge a path forward that's innovative and exciting and more engaging for everybody who participates in these meetings. One of the suggestions that we staff members who have been working on this initiative have had is to make sure that council is kept up to date about the work. There are going to be a few asks where really getting input from council members would be helpful. And so we had requested that we have 2 ad hoc appointees from council to kind of help advise us and to fill in some of the gaps where we think a council perspective would be really valuable. We have a couple of council members who expressed an interest, but it looks like we're coming down to a recommendation that we have 2 council members in particular, Matt Benjamin and Rachel Friend, who could get appointed for this phase of the work. And what I want to just explain is how we anticipate this project rolling out. We think there's going to be a flurry of consultation with the council appointees over the next couple of weeks, because there is going to be an assessment push that happens in July, August, and maybe even a little bit into September, where our partners with National Civic League will be doing some interviews with some representative community members, some council members, and then also pushing out a general tool that allows anybody in the Boulder community to give their feedback on what's worked and what hasn't worked. And that activity is going to be happening this summer and into early fall. Then I would anticipate that there's going to be a little bit of a lull where our NCL partners assess all of the information that they've received, and then they will come back to us in late fall, early winter with recommendations of some things we might try and pilot. And so one way of looking at this was thinking about, well, who's going to be on council in 2024 when the pilots work? Another way of looking at it that NCL has suggested has been to have one council member who's been on council and seen engagement during COVID and post-COVID, but then also have someone who was on council and saw engagement pre-COVID, because the pandemic has been such a pivot point for the public's expectations from these meetings, what's even possible with technology. And so that was a recommendation they made. So the staff is suggesting that we appoint Matt Benjamin and Rachel Friend. When Rachel cycles off council, we should have a few months to kind of have everybody get their feet beneath them, and then we could make a decision then as to who might pick up the council liaison specific position as we move into piloting phase.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And Matt and Rachel, you're all willing to be appointed?
I'm excited for it. Willing and excited if possible.
Yeah, this is gonna be great work. We've heard plenty from all sides about our meetings and such. So from either behind or in front of the dais. So it's work that needs to be done.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your willingness. We'll vote on the appointment here in a minute when we get to voting on the consent agenda. So that's good on 2C. Wonder, we did have 15 minutes pegged for 2B, if anyone wanted to speak to that. Bob.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm going to be voting against 2B, but I felt I owed it to my colleagues to explain why. If you give me just a second, let me just call up my notes. And this will just take a couple minutes. I appreciate you indulging me. The Police Oversight Panel has not asked for a moratorium from council. In fact, when the deputy city manager rather, suggested to the panel that requesting a council moratorium would be a safer way for them to stop working, several panel members rejected the idea, saying they wanted to send a signal to council. Some of the panel members described the unilateral work stoppage as a sit-in or a strike. Regardless of whether the panel doesn't take on new cases as a result of their own unilateral work stoppage or under a council moratorium, the panel has said that it will still work on the 10 cases that is already accepted, which I'm happy about, and that this is work which the deputy city attorney says is expected to take through September to complete. Council expects to adopt revisions to the Police Oversight Panel's enabling ordinance in early October. So the ordinance changes would roughly coincide with the exhaustion of the Police Oversight Panel's existing funnel of 10 cases. But by imposing a moratorium on taking new cases this summer, which cases would presumably be handled in the fall, the panel will have little or nothing on its plate once the council moratorium ends on October 20th, which is the date which is being proposed. The stated reason for the work stoppage and the moratorium is so that 2 of the panel's 11 members can serve on a community committee that is working on changes to the Police Oversight Panel's enabling ordinance. But that work is well underway and is being managed by an independent consultant who is scheduled to present her preliminary recommendations to council on July 27. While input from the panel is welcomed as the consultant wraps up her work this summer, it's hard to imagine that the efforts to provide that input will distract the panel from accepting cases that it in fact won't work on until the fall in any event. I have to ask, what happens if the Police Oversight Panel ordinance changes recommended by the independent consultant later this month and ultimately adopted by council in the fall are not acceptable to some or all of the members of the Police Oversight Panel? We already know that some of the changes currently requested by the panel are unlikely to be approved by council. Will the panel then unilaterally continue their work stoppage indefinitely until they receive what they want? If that unilateral work stoppage continues beyond the end of any council imposed moratorium, will the panel then be in violation of the law, which might draw yet another code of conduct complaint, which will need to be investigated by independent counsel? So finally, I'm concerned about the precedent that a council moratorium sets, especially in response to a panel's refusal to work. But the city has about 20 boards and commissions in addition to the Police Oversight Panel. Unlike the Police Oversight Panel members who do in fact get paid for this service, the residents who serve on these 20 boards and commissions are unpaid. And from time to time, some of those board members are unhappy about one thing or another. By capitulating to the Police Oversight Panel's refusal to work, is council signaling to the 20 other boards that it's okay if they go out on strike if their demands are not met? What would happen if, for example, residents serving on the planning board stop processing site review applications? Or the Landmarks Board stop preserving historic buildings, or the Beverage Licensing Authority stop prosecuting liquor law violations? I understand that the primary motivation for council to grant a moratorium to the Police Oversight Panel is to avoid having to appoint a special counsel to investigate the panel's unilateral work stoppage. However, last week, the deputy city attorney advised us that there is no urgency in appointing a special counsel to deal with this work stoppage code of conduct complaint. We could literally wait on that appointment for another couple of months, pass the revisions to the Police Oversight Panel enabling ordinance, and assuming that the panel then got back to work, the complaint would become moot and would be dismissed without the need for an investigation. For those reasons, I'm going to vote against the moratorium tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I've got Mark next.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same point of view. It's unclear to me, are we doing this for the benefit of the oversight panel, which doesn't seem to wish us to do this, or for the benefit of the city council? As Bob mentioned, I don't think we would permit this on the part of any other board or commission, and it sends a rather bizarre message. You can go on strike, you can refuse to perform the role for which you were appointed. You can leave important work undone, but not to worry, there will be no consequence for doing so. I am very uncomfortable with that. I don't find there is a great rationale for the direction which we're likely to take. And frankly, I would just let it lay and move forward on the ordinance revision. And it becomes moot at that time that we pass the revision. Bob raises a good point. Are we now making the revision of the ordinance subject to the police oversight panel's approval as opposed to our approval? It's unclear to me. So I'm also going to vote against it.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else? Ginny.
I did have a question, and I was a bit concerned by this new process that all of a sudden that we can change the rules, because ultimately, even though I disagree with all these code of conduct violation, but it seems like all of a sudden there is a special process when before there was no special process. So I was a bit confused by that, but I would like to maybe ask Bob and Mark a question, and it could be because I missed a little bit of the conversation. Based on what I heard from the two of you, this is not something that is being requested by all members. And it seemed it's just maybe two members. I see that some of you are frozen on my screen. I hope you can hear me, but I wanted to get a better sense of whether this is something that was requested by all members, or is it something because two members are pushing and now we're making that decision because of them ultimately?
To my knowledge, the members of the police oversight panel are not pushing for this. They specifically rejected coming to council and saying, you know, this would be better. We would be better off with a moratorium and freezing everything in place. What do you think about that? They want the imprimatur of being on strike. Okay, I'm good with that, but I'm not sure why we are taking these steps to say, no, you're not on strike. You know, the decision that you've made is not one that we recognize. All's good because we're giving you a moratorium. It seems a little bit backwards to me.
Ginny, do you mind if I respond a little bit as well?
Thank
And
you.
Rich, I'll call on you after that. We did get emails from the two co-chairs who, to put a fine point on it, I think less requested this and more stated that they felt like it was that since council had brought it forward, they thought it was a good action for us to take. And I will mention that I've spoken to additional panel members who had a similar perspective. So it's less of a request and more that we're hearing from multiple panel members that this is an action that they would welcome for whatever that distinction is worth. And then I've got Rachel here.
May I colloquy with you for a moment, Mayor?
Sure.
Are you aware of what changed in their thinking to go from, no, we don't want to do this, we don't want to request this from council, to a point where, you know, it's not really a bad idea. Why don't you do that?
I don't know that I can fully speak for panel members to talk about an exact chain of thought over the last few weeks, but I will say that there is some distinction between requesting something officially and welcoming us taking an action.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course, Rachel, and then we'll come back to Ginny.
Awesome. I mean, I think Bob makes a good point about precedent setting and other boards and maybe ripple effects. So I'm wondering if someone, I don't know if it's city attorney or a colleague is there a counterpoint to the letting it lie? Like if we just don't appoint a special counsel and and then we get through this and they essentially are on strike or you know, sort of an unstated moratorium, what is the downside to doing it that way? If there is a potential downside to setting precedent of like, you know, if you, I don't know, like I wouldn't want another board to kind of hold us hostage, like, you know, that could feel not a good precedent to set. So is there a downside to Bob's suggestion here, and I don't know if that's city attorney or I think maybe Mayor Brackett, you asked for us to have this discussion. So what can we get a good counterpoint? And I think we probably owe it to the public who's only heard Bob's suggestion here. Like why would we do it another way?
Maybe I could call on City Attorney Erin Poe, who had raised her hand.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Erin Poe, Deputy City Attorney. This is an unprecedented matter. We have not had a board take action like this. It was not the recommended course of action for them. And now we're in the circumstance where we are offering services by ordinance that at some point will not be delivered. And so that's the basis for the option of the moratorium. And I think Councilmember Yates and Wallach bring up valid concerns. This is not an ideal option. It's not a fix-all for this situation. The ordinance could take longer to draft than expected, which would, you know, end up having a longer delay in the services performed in police oversight. So it's not offered as a cure-all or a fix-all, but to cure the legal defect of what is offered by ordinance versus what we can actually deliver on right now.
And apologies, got your title wrong, Deputy City Attorney Erin Poe. Thank you. And Junie, you had asked a question before. I wanted to make sure that you had your question answered and you were finished with that line of inquiry. Did you have anything more on that?
Not at this time. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I've got Bob's hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on Junie's question too, which I thought was a very good question. You know, last week we talked about this and I was curious as to, you know, what the reasons were and what people's, you know, what were they stating about this and what advice the Deputy City Attorney had provided at that meeting, which I think was early May, a little month and a half ago. And I was advised by the city manager and my colleagues that rather than asking the police oversight panel to explain themselves or tell whether they wanted a moratorium or not, or the reasons for it, that I should simply watch the video. So I did. It was 3.5 hours long. Many of you probably watched it from end to end as well. And in that video, at least the thing I was told to watch, they were very clear that they did not want to ask counsel. Some of them were quite direct in, I even wrote down some quotes. I'm not going to repeat them here now, but they are public record about why they didn't want counsel to grant a moratorium. So not only did they not request it, several of them outright refused it and said that they would be quite put off if we granted a moratorium. And so that's what we were told to rely on in making our decision tonight. And that's what I am relying on, making our decision tonight. I appreciate the fact that Erin has had some offline conversations with some members of the panel and is representing what it is they said to them, but none of us, I mean, I'm sure that what Erin is representing is true, but that's not evidence before us. That's not the record before us. The record before us is what we were told to look at. And I looked at that and it was quite clear to me that with the exception of the one panel member who voted against the work stoppage, many, probably most of the panel members, quite frankly, did not want a council moratorium.
Okay, Lauren.
Thank you, Erin. I had a follow-up question, sort of based on what Rachel was talking about with precedent. Do we, for boards like Planning Board or Historic Preservation or Landmarks Board, if, say, 2 members moved away from the city and we didn't have quorum, what would happen in that case? Would we be unable to move things forward, or are there ways in which the city might go forward without?
Erin Poe, do you want to answer that?
Yes, thank you. I know the planning board has a mechanism where they can call back former planning board members to have a quorum. Other boards, and it's close to have been, been an occurrence in the past, we would have to go to council for an emergency ordinance to appoint someone so that the board could do its work and make its, approve or hear whatever case was needed. Otherwise, without a quorum, they could not do their work under the ordinance.
And there isn't a fallback mechanism other than appointing new members for how that might be dealt with.
Correct, not for most boards.
Thank you.
Matt?
Actually, I appreciate that. It's actually, this is an interesting conversation to be having. I'm glad that we're having it sort of again, but a little bit more nuanced. And I appreciate the points made before this. And I guess I'm trying to just really pin down, really the pros and cons here. And to be clear, if I remember from our last meeting, we still have we have discretion on when. We don't have to appoint a special counsel now. We can wait a little bit. The question is, how long can we wait? Can we wait until the new ordinance is created and passed and effectively nullifies the need for such complaint? Or is that complaint anchored in space and time to where no matter what we do later, we still have to reconcile that thing? So that's a question I have, because I'm trying to understand the pros and cons here. If we go through this process of a moratorium versus we don't need to and we can just continue the work, I'm trying to sort of get a sense. So that's maybe a question for city attorney on that one.
Sure. I think a reasonable amount of time we have to appoint a special counsel. So there's no deadline in the ordinance. It isn't 60, 30, 15 days. I don't think that would allow us to postpone it indefinitely. But I think a reasonable amount of time, and of course it would be up to a court to determine what reasonable was in these circumstances. I think probably waiting until October might be too long.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll just say that the precedent piece weighs a bit, I think, on that front, and it's worth noting that that's a weird precedent we've put ourselves in. The other point I'll just make a note of is there's a very unfortunate situation that's occurred that this panel will not get to weigh in on. We had a use of force that resulted in death, and this panel will not get to touch that. And so the circumstance of all of this, I think, is tragic, because the nature of this oversight panel was to do exactly those most extreme cases. And they put themselves in their position not to review probably one of the more important ones that are out there. So I think that's just unfortunate that we're in that situation. All in all.
I got a bunch of hands, but maybe I'll let Aaron Poe go next.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that no complaint, to my knowledge, has been received about the shooting death. So that is not in queue to be heard. In theory, it could come in, they could be back to work and they would hear it. And also tonight, we're not asking for appointment of special counsel for the code of conduct, just consideration of the moratorium.
Thanks for the clarifications. Tara and then Rachel.
Would it be appropriate to ask Aaron why the two co-chairs asked for the moratorium, or to have them tell us, or is that not appropriate?
Which Aaron are you talking to?
Aaron, not Aaron, Aaron Brockett.
I think that's me. So the co-chairs each sent us emails. And so I think I'd refer council to those emails, because that was their official statement on the matter. I don't have them right in front of me, so I wouldn't want to try to summarize them right this second, if that's all right, Tara. But I may welcome you to look them up quickly if you'd like to. Rachel?
I will say that I came in very prepared to just vote yes and move on. Like we have had a lot of police oversight panel discussions in the last 6 months. So I want to put that out there. And I think Bob made a pitch that probably landed with my legal side. Like I don't want to set bad and unnecessary precedent, at this job. I don't think it benefits the city, our boards, anyone. So that just made me, it gave me some pause. So what I would ask is, I think we have this scheduled to pass an emergency. So is this an emergency? Can we come back to it in, we all love to keep relooking at this, like, so is this something we can look at in July or August and see where we've gotten with the work, if we might be close to done, if this is really something that we have to vote on tonight?
I got Nicole and then I'll call on myself.
Yeah, I kind of made my feelings clear last week and don't feel like I need to repeat that, but I think that passing on it and punting would be a mistake. I feel like sitting in this place of uncertainty is a really hard thing for any group of people. And so I would prefer that we figure this out tonight, whatever it is, just figure it out so that there's some certainty and we can move forward.
Thanks. And I'll call on myself and then Mark and just say, just reiterate just a little bit of what I said last week, but that I think the purpose of this is to remove the threat of legal action and complaints from the police oversight panel members while they're doing the work of revising the ordinance. And I've heard saying that, okay, we don't have a fixed timetable for appointing of special counsel, but at the same time, Aaron Poe's talking about that the reasonable amount of time may well be less than the amount of time that it takes to revise the ordinance. So I think that threat of legal action will still hang out there if we do not pass this. And in fact, it might prompt additional complaints or lawsuits and such. So I would love to just go ahead and get this done tonight so that we can move on and let the panel do their ordinance revision work. And then we won't have to touch this again until we're considering the ordinance revisions. And I think I would like to see that outcome personally. So maybe we can have a vote here in a minute and see what the majority feels like. But Mark.
I would take a different view, Mayor. I would let it sit for anywhere from 90 to 120 days. I'm not overly concerned that we'll be flooded with a slew of litigation. I think it's within our discretion to do that. And I would just let it lie. And in 90 to 120 days, we can see where we are with respect to the ordinance revision and what we need to do with respect to a moratorium. But the precedent of this really does distress me a bit. And I would like to not create that precedent tonight.
Got it. Bob?
Yeah, I've said my piece. I just wanted to ask a question if that's okay with you, Aaron.
Go ahead.
It's a question of staff, probably for Nuria. Nuria, is it possible that we could move forward the stated reason for wanting to have a moratorium or work stoppages so that the police oversight panel can, I guess, work with us or make some suggestions on revisions to their enabling ordinance. And I don't know if we're going to make them happy or not, but that's a different issue. I know that we're going to receive a report or update or something like that from FARA at the end of next month, which is great. I look forward to that. And then the actual ordinance first reading, second reading for the actual changes don't happen until October. Is it possible that can be moved up until either August or September? I know we have a very full calendar, but to Aaron Poe's observation, we couldn't let this special council appointment sit too long. And so I'm wondering if we could shorten that period of time. To Mark's point, let it sit, but rather than having it sit for 4 months, which is kind of what would be the case if we don't do a moratorium tonight, is it possible that we can move that into August or even into September with a little bit of extra work, Nuria?
So I appreciate that, council member, and we'll say that August is not likely, and I don't want to necessarily preclude that October. I think we were trying to go for October 5th, but the consultant and the working group really have a schedule of some engagement. They have a timetable by which to do this. I don't want to speak for the consultant. I'm happy to go back and speak to her, but I can't imagine that it is going to be a significantly accelerated time frame given the work and the engagement that we want to do with this, and to be able to bring that ordinance through the parties, including CAO, the rest of the panel, staff, to take a look at that as well. But I am certainly happy to look. I just know that it won't be August, and happy to consider September, but I will also say that September is a very full calendar, particularly with budget, as we are entering that timetable. And if we were able to do something, we might have to look at a special meeting. I'm happy to get back to council, but I think it is a rush that is already on a timetable that is accelerating.
Thanks, Mary. That's helpful. I'm actually going to agree with Aaron and Nicole on their point that we should just vote yes or no tonight. I do agree that having this hang out there for a long time, sounds like probably till October, probably is unacceptable. We may draw another code of conduct complaint against us for failing to respond to code of conduct complaints. So let's just decide tonight. That's where I'm at. I'm going to vote no, but if there's a majority that wants to vote yes, then that's fine.
Very good. So if folks are okay, I'd like to go ahead and call for or invite a motion on the consent agenda. That would be the next step. Nicole.
I move to approve the consent agenda with Matt and Rachel as the representatives to the, forgetting what it's called. Better
Public Meetings.
Thank you, Matt. Better Public Meetings.
Great. We have a second. I'll go ahead and second it. Alicia, I think we have a roll call.
Yes, sir, we do. And we'll start the roll call for the consent agenda with Councilmember Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett,
Yes.
Councilmember Folkers,
Yes.
Friend,
Yes.
Joseph,
Yes.
Spear,
Yes.
Wallach.
Yes, but no on the moratorium.
Thank you, sir. Weiner
Yes.
and Yates.
Yes, but no on the moratorium.
The consent agenda items A through C are hereby approved with the noted nays for item 2B from Councilmember Wallach and Yates.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for talking that through. Continues to be a challenging issue. Bob, do you have an additional thought?
Not on this item. We talked about it a lot, but I did want to congratulate and thank Judge Kahn for agreeing to serve as our interim municipal judge after Judge Cook retires. Nuri, I wondered, are we prepared tonight to talk about whatever process is for the permanent appointment, or is that something that's going to come to us later in the summer?
That is something that's going to come later. We did not anticipate, knowing that this meeting was full, that we would talk about it tonight.
Great. Well, I will look forward to that, and I just want to thank Judge Kahn for agreeing to serve as our interim municipal judge.
Thanks for that, Bob. Appreciate you bringing that up. I'm also very grateful to, oh, and look, Judge Kahn is here in person. Could you speak to us, please?
Hello, thank you all, and I'll be just really brief. I just wanted to say what a privilege it's been to work with Judge Cook for these past 21 years and really appreciate everything she's done for our court. And I appreciate all of you, the support you've given our court for so long. And I'm very excited about the next stage for our court. I really look forward to leading our team and being a part of it. And I look forward to meeting you all in person. Some of you I've met in the last couple of weeks, had a chance to at least say hello to. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you all a little bit better. But thank you so much for the appointment.
Thank you for stepping up, Judge Kahn. We're thrilled to have you in the role.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good. All right. Well, with that finishes out our consent agenda. So if we could move to our public hearing, please, Alicia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our public hearing is item 3 on tonight's agenda. And 3A is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt ordinance 8577, rezoning approximately 1.01 acres of land located at 5405 Spine Road, an adjacent right-of-way from the industrial general to the business community 2 zoning district as described in chapter 9-5 modular zone systems of the BRC 1981 and setting forth related details. This is referenced under case number LUR 2022-00057.
We can go straight to Chandler, Mayor.
Great. Chandler, you're up.
Thank you. I understand someone over there will be driving the presentation. All right. So as Alicia just mentioned, this is the second reading of an ordinance which will rezone 5405 Spine Road. Next slide, please. We don't need to read this one because Alicia just read that. So next slide, please. So in terms of process, this went to planning board on May 16th. They voted 6-0 to recommend approval of the rezoning to city council. The first reading of the ordinance was on June 1st, and we are now at second reading. Next slide, please. So the site is located at the northwest corner of Spine and Lookout Roads and is occupied by an existing 14,643 square foot building constructed in 1982. It's housed a variety of industrial and office uses over the past 40 years and currently contains an office use. There is a surface parking lot with 39 parking spaces. Next slide, please. So the site is located within the boundaries of the Gun Barrel Community Center Plan. This was adopted in 2002. There was much public participation, and the plan established the vision for redevelopment in much of the Gun Barrel commercial and office area with the goal of emphasizing urban development patterns with a diverse mix of vibrant uses. The plan provides direction for reviewing public improvements and private sector development proposals in the area. The land use designation assigned in the Gun Barrel Community Center Plan for this site is community retail. Next slide, please. So the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan land use designation was also updated following adoption of the Gun Barrel Community Center Plan. The existing land use designation on the site is community business. These areas are the focal point for commercial activity serving a subcommunity or a collection of neighborhoods. They are designated to serve the daily convenience, shopping, and personal service needs of nearby residents and workers and support the goal of walkable communities. Next slide, please. So the existing zoning for the site is IG, industrial general. That's defined as general industrial areas where a wide range of light industrial uses and some complementary residential uses may be allowed in appropriate locations. So the existing zoning for the site is not consistent with the underlying land use designation. Next slide, please. So this shot shows the surrounding context, the immediate surroundings, primarily industrial, but there have been a variety of recent rezonings as well. So there are retail uses nearby, along with some new residential. The Gun Barrel Shopping Center in King Soopers is just to the southeast of the site. Several restaurants have also popped up in the last several years. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows all of the properties that are surrounded in yellow are properties that have been rezoned following adoption of the Gun Barrel Community Center Plan. So you can see, I won't read through all of them, but you can see that there are several sites that have been rezoned from industrial general to community business zoning, high density residential, and regional business zones consistent with the underlying land use designation and the GCCP. Next slide, please. So the key issue for discussion tonight, which is the same key issue that was discussed at the planning board hearing, is the rezoning request consistent with the required review criteria for rezoning? Next slide, please. So these criteria are found in section 9219E of the Boulder Revised Code. It says the city council shall grant a rezoning application only if the proposed rezoning is consistent with the policies and goals of the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, and for an application not incidental to a general revision of the zoning map meets one of the following criteria. So first, we're going to discuss consistency with the BVCP policies. Next slide, please. Staff finds that the proposed rezoning is on balance consistent with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan goals and policies. In particular, policy 2.19 neighborhood centers, which supports evolution of these centers to become mixed-use places in accordance with area planning efforts, and is also tied to the community business land use designation. Policy 2.09 neighborhoods as building blocks. Policy 2.24 commitment to a walkable and accessible city, and policy 5.01 revitalizing commercial and industrial areas. Next slide, please. So the remaining review criteria, the applicant must demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that the rezoning meets one of the following criteria. So in this case, the applicant has shown that the proposed rezoning is necessary to come into compliance with the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan map. Specifically, as mentioned above, the Boulder Valley Comp Plan land use designation for the site is community business, whereas the existing zoning is industrial general. The BC2 zone district has been determined by planning staff to be consistent with the community business land use designation. Therefore, we find that the proposed rezoning will bring the site into compliance with the underlying land use map. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess I just kind of read everything that was going to be on this next slide, but this is just the definition of the community business zone. So in terms of the review process, this is quasi-judicial. Planning board makes a recommendation. City council is the ultimate decision authority. In terms of the public notice process, written notice was sent out to property owners within 600 feet of the site, as well as posted on the property. Staff has received no comments or questions from the public on this application. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff finds that the proposed rezoning application does meet the rezoning criteria of section 9219E of the Boulder Revised Code and finds the proposed rezoning request to be in compliance with the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan and the Gun Barrel Community Center Plan. Next slide, please. This is the suggested motion language, which is a motion to adopt ordinance 8577, rezoning approximately 1.01 acres of land located at 5405 Spine Road and adjacent rights of way from the industrial general to the business community 2 zoning district as described in chapter 9.5 modular zone system, BRC 1981, setting forth related details. Next slide. Now I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chandler. Anyone have questions for Chandler? Seeing no questions, then we can go to the public hearing. And we have one person signed up. They will get 3 minutes to speak. So are we ready to bring Lynn Siegel online for her testimony?
Yes, sir, I am taking care. She should be able to unmute herself and speak now.
Trying to talk, but you were talking. I don't exactly know what I want to say on this issue, quite frankly. You know, but there is one thing. I think I should know better from the presentation what exactly is happening here, and I don't. And I'm the public, and I'm supposed to be advising you because you're advising how the city operates. So I think that's your responsibility. It's not mine. Also, following 9 city boards and trying to read an awful lot of stuff that I don't have a clear idea of what's happening here. I could have read all the stuff behind this to understand it. I think that I want more of a business community than industrial site here, but maybe I don't, because all the industrial spaces in Boulder are getting pushed out east further and further and further as we have less and less land, because everything is about the housing god. The housing god that the city of Boulder doesn't seem to understand is also the creation of jobs and the creation of a jobs housing imbalance, and does not agree with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. So I think you people ought to have a lot deeper consideration before you just vote for something like this, because maybe we need that as industrial, since there's no place to stick our industrial anymore. And you know what? My favorite retail, Top Hat janitorial supply, or get those little green thingies that you scrape your dishes off with for really cheap at. Now I have to ride my bike all the way to Gun Barrel to get them because it's not on Pearl Street anymore. That's a problem for me. I don't like to take an hour and a half of my time to go to Gun Barrel on my bike when I've got 9 city boards to follow. I don't have a lot of time to, you know, just throw around. So I don't like to see businesses and retail just exiting my immediate area. And I think that's probably what you're trying to do here, is get more business here and less industrial, right? But we need industrial too, don't we? Because we've stuck housing in every industrial site. Done.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Does anyone have any discussion or perhaps a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt an ordinance, if that's okay with anybody.
Go for it.
All right. I'll make an option to adopt ordinance 8577, rezoning approximately 1.01 acres of land located at 5405 Spine Road and adjacent rights of way from the industrial general IG to the business commercial 2 BC2 zoning district as described in chapter 9-5, modular zone system BRC 1981, and setting forth related details.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Alicia, could we have a vote, please?
Yes, sir. We'll start the vote for item 5A with you, Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkers.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wallach.
Yes.
Councilmember Weiner.
Yes.
Yates.
Yes.
And Benjamin.
Yes.
Ordinance 8577 is hereby adopted unanimously.
Very good. Thanks everyone for that. I will now go ahead and gavel our special meeting closed and hand the reins over to Councilmember Mark Wallach to do our study session.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Good evening and welcome to tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I am Mayor Pro Tem Wallach, and thank you for joining us. As this is our final meeting before our summer break, I am sure that all questions will be pertinent and all comments will be focused. We have on tonight's agenda 3 items. Our first item will be the Municipal Court Quarterly Update. Our second item is the Boulder County Clerk's Presentation 2023 and Beyond Election Review, which will include an update on ranked choice voting and staff's presentation regarding potential ballot items. And lastly, our last item is information regarding the 2024 City of Boulder Energy Conservation Code development project. Before we go into our work items, I would like to outline how the meeting will be conducted. We'll review staff's presentations for each of the items, and then we'll have a time for questions. At the end of the presentation, we will conduct our council discussion with staff. If you have questions, please wait for staff to complete their presentation. And we will now turn to our city manager, Nuria Rivera Vandermeide, to introduce our first item.
Thank you so much, Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem, I should say. And I'm going to try to keep all my comments short today, but I will sneak in just a note of gratitude to Judge Cook as she gives her last official municipal court quarterly update. It has been a privilege to work alongside her and see the work that the municipal court is doing, and in particular, the great work the community court is really doing. So, Judge Cook, I leave that to you.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Nuria. And it's so great to have you as our city manager, given that the Austin Community Court is one of our role models for this initiative. So that's been very beneficial. I was told earlier that there were points in time when my voice broke up. So if that happens, please flag that for me. I'll turn off my video because that can help. With me tonight, first of all, good evening, Mayor and members of council. With me tonight is Nyat Nguyen. He's our lead navigator. Nyat worked at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless in a variety of capacities for 4 years. When we hired Megan Newton to replace our first navigator, we also hired Nyat to work alongside her. He left us briefly to coordinate the Be There team, but came back as our lead navigator when Megan moved over to HHS. He is a hard worker and has an incredible understanding of the topic of homelessness in general, as well as of the various individuals experiencing homelessness in our community. Do we have the presentation? Can we have that up?
And Judge, you are breaking up just a little bit, so turning off your video is probably a good call.
Okay, so you can go to the next slide. And the reason I'm discussing this tonight is I just want to give you a deeper understanding of the work that these navigators provide. It can be very confusing when we also have the Be There team, we have ambassadors, we have case managers with other entities. So I really wanted to dial that in for you. Next slide, please. So this slide you've seen before in some of my other presentations. It's just here to remind you that while the court navigators will assist anyone, their primary area of focus is the unsheltered, unhoused individuals with the highest level of acuity, which is the bottom line circled on this graphic. All right, next slide, please. I broke this navigation work down into phases based on some system mapping work that our peers in Austin did. Their work is depicted in slides included at the end of this PowerPoint, and while I don't intend to discuss those slides, I thought you might be interested in having them as a reference for the future. Incidentally, that work that was done in Austin was funded by their Downtown Austin Alliance in 2018, and then in 2019 they followed it up with mapping of the behavioral health systems for people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts the outreach phase. Outreach may be done by any one of several service providers, but only Be There and shelter staff are allowed to do CE or coordinated entry screens. What's important to remember here is that anyone may disengage at any step along the way of any of these phases we're going to talk about, in which case we're coming back here to this slide and attempting outreach all over again. Next slide. This is the same slide, but the two circles in green indicate where our navigators play a role in outreach. Outreach is not their primary job function as it is for Be There, but they will engage in outreach and referral if the need presents itself. Nihat, do you have any idea what percentage of the individuals refuse to engage with you and Nick, our other navigator, on your first attempt?
Yeah, first off, good evening, councils, and thank you for having me here tonight. And to answer Judge Cook's questions, it's about 20 to 25% of individuals who will refuse to engage with us on our first attempt of making contact with them.
Do you have any estimate of the percentage of people who are impaired or distracted by substance use or mental health issues?
Yeah, sorry about that, Judge Cook, but it's about 60 to 70% of individuals who are either impaired or distracted by substance when we make contact with them.
And do you have an idea of the average number of times it takes before somebody agrees to engage with you?
Yes, this really depends on the client, but on average, it takes 3 to 4 tries before they really trust us and sit down and do anything with us.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide is an attempt to provide some metrics for this outreach phase. The center column is the exact metric that we're providing numbers on. As you would expect, given their respective roles, Be There has more contacts with more individuals than our navigators during this phase. And you saw some of this data in different format in your Safe and Managed Spaces update a few months ago. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next phase is client engagement. And if you go to the next slide, client engagement typically falls into 3 large categories defined by the circles at the top. And then at the bottom, I have the entities that mostly participate in those various columns of tasks. Next slide, please. But again, if you look at the areas highlighted in that glowing lime green borders, you will see that our navigators are primarily working during the engagement phase to assist with service needs for those who are unhoused and unsheltered. So accessing public benefits, accessing wellness appointments, and very significantly helping them keep appointments in the criminal justice system. And that's not just in our court, but in all of the courts where they may have cases here in Boulder County. Nihat, do you have any idea of the percent of people who refuse shelter after going through coordinated entry?
Yeah, I do not have the percentage for our community as a whole, but 90% of the clients that work with us in the community court program will not access the Boulder shelter.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Again, another slide showing metrics for the various service needs our navigators help to provide. And this is where you begin to see the shift in roles. The navigators are much more involved and be there in assisting people with service needs, especially those needs that are associated with the criminal justice system involvement. Although again, there still is a little bit of overlap. I do want to call out one difference. On the Be There side, you will see a reference to referrals by and large. And on the navigator side, you'll see completions. And that's because an individual must complete the task associated with their service to earn dismissal of a community court eligible case. And in fact, the navigators are often accompanying the person to the appointment if it's medical or dental or mental health or whatever. So while Be There tracks referrals, we are tracking referrals completed. Nihat, about how long would you say it takes when you go to a physical or behavioral health appointment with an individual?
On average, it takes us about 2.5 hours to do that.
Okay, and how about attending court?
On average for that, it's about 3.5 hours.
Okay, so it's a fair amount of time that gets eaten up with these, with helping people navigate these systems by accompanying them. Can you tell us about the work that you did with one client, Nihat, to help him complete his out of custody competency evaluation?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we had a client who was ordered to do out of custody competency restoration, and due to COVID, all of his restoration meeting were being done over the phone. The client has no phone, no laptops, and he has pretty severe memory issues. So what happened was I ended up going out to look for him every time he has an appointment, and I would bring him back to the Justice Center. We would let him use one of our hearing room there. We would turn a movie on for him on one of our computers and let him watch as he wait for his appointment. And the wait time is usually about 1.5 hours to 2 hours long. And when it's time for the appointment, I just come out with a phone and we call the restoration worker together, and I do that.
All right. Thank you, Nihat. You just froze also, so you may want to turn your video off. I thought that was a very creative approach that Nihat took to make sure that this individual was able to keep his competency appointments. Once he was restored to competency, he was able then to go forward and see his felony charges through to the end. All right, next slide. So we're now going to talk about the pre-housing stage. Next slide. So here's sort of the main categories of what needs to happen in the pre-housing stage of engagement. It's focused primarily on the tasks needed to get a person onto the wait list and document ready for housing. Next slide, please. So again, those glowing green shapes are functions that our navigators help to perform. And we, along with other service providers, are very involved in the pre-housing phase of engagement. So one of the other main service providers at this stage is Focus Reentry, but there are a couple of others too. There is an asterisk next to that box on the left or on the right that's marked skill building videos. They are funded by our community court grant and should be done by the end of September. But some of the topics that we're going to have are, for instance, how to get ready for housing once you're on the list, what steps to expect once you've been matched with a voucher, how to set boundaries with your unhoused friends once you move in, and how to secure meals and food and so forth. Nihat, a couple more questions. Of our highest utilizers, say our top 45 utilizers across multiple parts of the system, what percentage of those would you say have done the VI SPDAT?
About 63% of the highest utilizers have done the VIs for that, but only about 13 of them are actually on our regional housing list.
So the only 13, that means they originally did the survey that was needed to get them onto the housing list, but then they haven't stayed in touch enough to remain on the list. Is that about right?
That is correct.
What's the average VI score for unhoused people in Boulder County?
So the average score for an unhoused individual in Boulder County is 8. The maximum score for VIs for that is 17.
And what's the average VI score for municipal court clients?
For municipal court client, it is 13.
Okay, so that again confirms that we're working with really high acuity clients. Next slide, please. So another set of metrics. You can see in the center what the metric is. And as we progress into these pre-housing tasks, the role of the outreach workers, such as Be There, really drops off. And the role of the court navigator really picks up. Let's go to the next slide. Next phase is housing. So if you can go to the next slide. This is an attempt to capture the many steps that occur once a person on the wait list is matched to housing. It may not be all inclusive, but it's pretty comprehensive. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. Again, we use the lime green squares to depict the phases where our navigators are involved. And Nihat, what would you say is the percentage of people that you work with that lack the skill to navigate these systems and these particular housing tasks on their own?
So I don't have any data on this, but if I have to estimate, I would say about 70 to 80% of folks lack the skill to navigate these systems, if not higher than that.
All right, thank you, Nihat. And then, so if we go to the next slide, you can see the typical amount of time that's spent by the navigators at each of these various phases in the housing process. Nihat, can you talk a little bit about what a move-in day looks like and who is involved?
Yeah, it's usually an extensive list of people who are involved in move-in day. It's the housing case manager, the navigators, the HOT or BZ team for transportation, the property manager, and the client themselves. What will happen is the property manager will reach out to us and let us know when they're available for lease signing and move in. So we usually have to go out and find the clients after the property manager let us know, and we let them know when the move-in date is. And on the day of the move-in, we go to the client, wherever they're staying, and we help load their properties into the truck or van that we have that day. We bring them to their apartment. We do a quick walkthrough of the apartment to make sure everything is proper. We go through all the rules and policies with the client and property manager. Then we sign the lease, and after that, we usually have to call Excel to have their electricity turn on. And sometimes clients need help with furnishing the apartment. Some property have the furniture ready for them, but most property do not. And we usually have to reach out to an organization called Home Ahead, and they will help with any clients moving into their apartment for the first time with furnitures.
Thank you. If we can go to the next slide, we're going to discuss now the housing retention phase, and you can go to the next slide. Once someone has moved into housing, the work of the navigator is not necessarily done. Permanent supportive housing, or PSH as it's known, comes with an average of 1 visit per week by a housing case manager. For many of our high acuity clients, this is not enough, particularly in the early phases of being housed. But our navigators, in concert with many of the other service agency partners that you see listed there, work together to develop a plan for regular check-ins on whatever schedule is appropriate for the individual client. And on average, that's about 3 times per week. Eventually, as Building Home comes fully online, the navigators may be able to step back from some of this work. But if you'll go to the next slide, again, you can see this is where our navigators play a role. I'm wondering, Nihat, if you could give an example where the joint check-in model was very helpful in supporting somebody with a lot of needs.
Yeah, we have a client who moved into an apartment in Longmont earlier this year, and it was us the community court BHAP, focused reentry, heart, and mental health partner all worked with this client. And we all knew that she would be someone who would struggle to keep her housing. She has lost her housing 4 times previously. And so we would set up a bi-weekly meeting to talk about her specifically, and we check in on her about 4 times a week. And because she stayed in Longmont and she was such a social person, she was really struggling with not being able to hang out with all of her friends that were here in Boulder, and she didn't really have any support group in Longmont. And so she got really depressed and she started drinking a lot. She's binge drinking quite a bit, and she stopped eating completely. So there was a day when me and the heart officers were there to check in on her. And we found her in her apartment lying in her bed and not able to get up. And she was vomiting a lot of blood that day. There was quite a bit of blood right next to her bed. So we had to call for the paramedic and ask them for a transport to Boulder so we can get her on an emergency hold. And so she was in there for quite a bit of time, a few days, and then she got transitioned over to the TRT program with mental health partners. She's doing better now. She's very happy that we were there to help her. And one thing to note that is one of the paramedic personnel told us that if we weren't there that day, she might have died that day. She's doing a lot better, and she just wants to finish the program and return to her apartment.
Thank you, Nihat. All right, we're going to shift gears now, and I just want to follow up on something that was asked about at a previous council meeting. So if you can go to the next slide, it has to do with camping cases, and you can go to the following one. I know that this came up in the discussion about safe and managed spaces when Councilmember Yates asked a question about outcomes in camping cases. And Dr. Reinhardt from the police department attempted to answer the question, but I do want to emphasize for you that it's the court records management system that contains this data, not the police. They have the filings part, but we have the outcome part. But since you were curious, I provided the answers here. And I've also added a comparison to 2019 outcomes when we could impose alternative sanctions that were facilitated by the navigators, but only if people came to court in the courthouse, because we were not doing community court and we were not out in the community at that time. And so there's some pretty significant aspects to this data that I want to call out. First, the difference between the percentage of cases that resulted in jail sentences is similar. These cases are generally comprised of people who don't show up for court, they get arrested on bench warrants, they plead guilty, and they receive jail sentences. Second, if you assume that most of the 10% of cases from 20 to 23 that are still open, if you assume that they ultimately result in dismissal or go past retention, then the numbers for eventual dismissal also end up being pretty similar. So the 32% plus the 10% would be similar to the 42% plus the 2% on the bottom lines. But the really notable difference is that we've been able to convert cases where people were showing up for court, pleading guilty, getting a suspended fine, to cases where they are now getting an alternative sanction that requires engagement. So as a result, we're actually getting a higher level of accountability for these violations than we had before we implemented community court. And again, key to this really, I think, is the fact that we're doing community court on an outreach basis at different sites rather than depending on the defendants to walk through the courthouse door. And next slide. That's it.
All right, I think that is my cue. Does council have any questions of Judge Cook and yet? And by the way, thank you very much for that presentation. It was extremely informative, and I want to at least have my colleagues ask whatever questions they need to ask. Any hands? Nicole.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. That was really informative. One of the questions that I was wondering about is, in terms of folks who work their way into housing through community court, do we see any difference in terms of long-term success compared to those that are not coming in through community court? Because it's a higher needs population and the support they're getting is more intense. So just wondering if we have that data yet, and I understand if we don't.
I don't think we have that data yet, but it's something that we're working hard to keep track of.
Well, yeah, that'll be really interesting. And yeah, thank you.
All right. Anyone else with questions? Going once, twice. Let's open it up for comments. Nicole, you're first up.
Thank you. This just sort of a general comment, and Judge Cook, since it's your last evening with us, I figured I would just say it here. But I've heard from a number of people just the way that not just this community court, but also the work that you've done with restorative justice at the university, what a difference it has made. I think in terms of working with complicated systems and trying to get them to work better for the people involved. I just want to say thank you. I think, you've really changed lives. You've helped do some transformation of systems in your decades with the city. And it's kind of what we all hope we can do as public servants. And I just want to sincerely thank you for everything that you've done for the city. And thank you for sending us out with this wonderful presentation as well.
Thank you.
All right, Aaron, then Junie.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying also thanks. That was very informative, and it was great to have you here with us today. And some of those stories that you were telling were really inspiring about how city staff are really going above and beyond to help folks who are really struggling get into a better place in their lives. So that was just very impressive, and makes me proud of our city organization that we're doing work like that. So thanks for being here and talking us through that. And then Judge Cook, just wanted to echo Nicole's thanks. And you've been a transformative leader in the municipal court for over 20 years, and you've made such a difference in so many people's lives. And we're just deeply, deeply grateful for all of that work. So thank you for being with us one last time and talking about all the difference that you're making, that the court is making in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Junie, the floor is yours, followed by Bob, followed by Rachel.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I think it's the same for me. I just wanted to thank Judge Cook for the great and thoughtful presentation. And thank you for all the work you have done in Boulder. And also just hearing your presentation tonight, it's truly inspiring to know that you have done such great work in supporting our most vulnerable members of the population, and also for bringing that to give those personal stories. So thank you so much, and it means a lot, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Bob.
Well, I'd like to add my thanks as well. Judge Cook, you've been a great example to us and mentor to many of us, and we're all going to miss you. We wish you well in your retirement, and thank you also for bringing along Judge Khan. It's a very, very easy and smooth transition. You should be very proud of your successor, or at least your interim successor. I also want council to know that in addition to all the work that Judge Cook does to help vulnerable populations, and obviously it would be easy for a judge to simply sit on the bench in a black robe and hand down sentences, but Judge Cook is far more than that. But I also want folks to know that what Judge Cook has done here in Boulder has been recognized at the national level as well. Judge Cook is one of the founders of a national organization of municipal judges, and she has been a leader and mentor to many municipal judges around the country in sharing Boulder's best practices with other cities. And so it's not just the great work that Judge Cook is doing here in Boulder, but also the great work that's being done in other communities around the country under Judge Cook's leadership. So thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate your recognition of that.
Rachel.
Piggybacking on what Bob just said, despite the Judge Cook, your busyness and, national status, you have always been generous in giving your time to us as council members. I think you spent like 2 hours with me onboarding when I started and showing me around. And I'm sure that you did that for all of us and really gave us a perspective. And you've been always sort of unflinching in your your bird's eye view and on the ground perspective of what's really happening in Boulder. And you've shared, I think, what we needed to hear. So thank you for that. And I just want to also appreciate, I think one of the first times we crossed paths was at a homeless memorial probably 5 years ago. And I remember you just getting a lot of hugs from people that had gone through your court system. And as a fellow attorney, being pretty impressed that like a lot of people don't maybe want to hug the person who was sentencing them. So I thought that spoke volumes. So thank you. And I'm wishing you happiness and success in your next endeavors.
Thank you so much.
All right, Matt, followed by Tara.
Thanks, Mark. And these are great opportunities for us to really gush over people who in many ways do work that I would say is greater and more impactful than any one of us sitting on council. And you certainly exemplify that. And I think any one of us on council would love to be able to leave a lasting impression on our community the way you have, Judge Cook. And it's just a testament to everything you have done. And it's also great to sort of see in these reports and how you've transformed certainly our local justice system at the municipal court level. It's a breath of fresh air because of all the hard things we hear at the state level and nationally with regards to courts and the justice system in that sense. And to see such great work here gives us hope that there are these nuggets of places where good is being done for the right reasons and helping people. So I appreciate that a lot, and I really hope you great endeavors on your next journey. So thanks for all that great work, and appreciate you setting up Judge Khan for some great success.
Thank you, Matt.
Sarah.
Well, Judge Cook, I want to personally thank you for helping me, a non-lawyer, understand all that I could possibly need to understand on the courts and how things work, and all the time you put into teaching me, all the articles you sent. I have reading materials till the end of time. But I would want to say that besides all the accolades, you're truly a great person and also fun. And that's one of my highest values. So I appreciate everything that you are to us and to Boulder. Obviously, I'm not the only person that considers you a friend. You kind of thought I was, and now I see you have all these other friends, so that's fine. We'll share you. But I do hope that we keep in touch for a really long time, and I'm gonna miss talking to you.
Thank you. Likewise, and we'll just have to find reasons to connect.
Any other comments? If not, Judge Cook, thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you so much for your long service. And I hope the next step in your journey is going to be a fruitful one and enjoyable. Be well. Take care. Thank you. All right. With that, we're going to move to our next item, which is the Boulder County Clerk presentation, 2023 and beyond election review, and staff presentation regarding potential ballot items. For that, I am going to turn again to our city manager to introduce the matter and take it from there.
Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem. We have an amazing team that is working on elections, and that starts with a woman who needs no introduction to you all, our fabulous court clerk, Alicia Johnson. And I will say too that our CFO will later on be giving a presentation on the petition items, but I'm going to toss it to you, Alicia, to frame as ever she would like and to introduce our Boulder County guest.
Oh, thank you, Nuria. That was such a gracious introduction. I so appreciate it. Good evening again, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. I'm Alicia Johnson, serving the city as your city clerk and records manager. It is my honor and privilege to introduce this evening my esteemed counterpart in the county, our Boulder County Clerk, Molly Fitzpatrick. I have worked with Molly and her team these past 2.5 years as your city clerk and admire the job that she has to do. As I am the election official for the city, she managed the elections for multiple cities and the county. Molly and her team have been amazing partners as we prepare to introduce ranked choice voting to our voters this year. She is here tonight to provide council with updates on that work and where we are headed beyond 2023. Let me be the first to thank her for the time she is giving us tonight and the partnership that we have developed together.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I really appreciate that warm introduction, and it's certainly been so enjoyable to work with you and the rest of the Boulder City staff on all elections related matters, and especially this big one that voters will be facing this fall. So big thank you to you and the team. We enjoy the partnership as well. I believe I have about 10 minutes, which I appreciate, and then we'll dive into Q&A. And I will be talking about ranked choice voting, but I also wanted to take the opportunity just to kind of go over what we've been up to the last year or so and what the next year and a half will look like, and also provide some key information, key updates, statistics, fun facts, just so you have it in your back pocket. And of course, talk about ranked choice voting, but there's also a lot going on in elections besides just ranked choice voting. But we will just go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Let's see. Alicia, could you confirm verbally that you can see this? I've lost.
Yes, we can see it perfectly. Thank you, Mom.
Thank you. Perfect. All righty. So let's see here. Like I said, some key facts for you all about Boulder County voters. Right now, we have 228,000 active registered voters. In 2014, we had 184,000 active registered voters. So the county has grown, not that that's a surprise to anyone. The majority of our voters in Boulder County are unaffiliated. We have 47% unaffiliated, followed by the Democratic Party and then the Republican Party. This data and the following slides can be found on our maps and data section on our website. So lots of good, fun data to dig through there later. Usually I say this is a fun fact. I don't know if this is a fun fact for this audience, but Boulder County voters, Longmont actually just surpassed Boulder about a year ago with more registered voters in the city of Boulder. So a little interesting tidbit there, but you can see the breakdown of all of the active voters by city on our website, but this is just a snapshot. And then here's a high-level voter turnout slide between general and coordinated elections, again on our website. I know that it kind of takes a minute to orient yourself to this graph. Of course, as we all know, we have the higher turnout in the presidential and midterm elections and lower in the coordinated elections. And I know we are all very passionate about local elections and how much they impact community members in Boulder County. We're all doing the best we can to educate voters that there are elections in these odd years as well, and to make sure folks know what's on the ballot. And the great thing about Colorado is that, you get a ballot every election. So it's a good reminder, but we still want to, of course, see those numbers in those coordinated elections go way up. As I mentioned, I wanted to just provide a little bit of what we've been up to since the last election, or what we implemented in the last election. We did offer Spanish language ballots for the very first time in the 2022 general election. And so if a person came into a vote center and wanted to vote a Spanish ballot, we were able to produce that for them. On top of that, the state actually offered a statewide hotline that offered language assistance over the phone to voters in a lot of different languages. So that was a great new offering, and we are looking forward to continuing that this year as well. We also launched a Know Your Voting Rights effort, and this effort was designed to really center the experiences of voters who have historically faced discrimination or challenges with voting. And so this effort, this campaign, is designed to really center those experiences and make sure that those voters know that they absolutely have a right to vote. Here's where you go for resources. Here's how you escalate if you have any sort of issue with voting. And so we really want to proactively affirm the rights of all voters in Boulder County. We know that we have a diverse demographic here. We want to make sure that we're proactively affirming their right to vote and that they know that we're a resource here. We want everyone to participate. We will continue this in 2023. You all were wonderful in letting us put up these posters in city buildings. Would love to continue that partnership and promotion of this as well. In 2022, we also increased our partnership, and we're so thankful to the Emergency Family Assistance Association in Boulder. We did host a Vote Early Day event with EFA that went off really well, and we're continuing to look at how we can partner with EFA. So really across the board in 2022 and looking ahead to this year, we're looking at how we can continue to implement elections with an equity lens. And these fun facts and other updates and nuggets are captured in our post-election data report. And so you can find that on our website. And we do produce that after the election. So we can always look for kind of what's been going on there. At a high level, we have 4 back-to-back elections starting this fall. We have the 2023 coordinated election, of course, coming up. And so we are in the full swing of things. We go to print on our voter instructions in August. Ballot content is due in September to our office, and then we start printing and mailing ballots actually in September. So it is going to be a busy year. As we're implementing and executing this coordinated election, we will concurrently be planning the March presidential primary. We anticipate that date is going to be March 5th. The governor has not yet determined or has not yet vocalized that that's absolutely going to be the date, but we do expect that it will be Super Tuesday. And then we have the statewide primary on June 25th, and then the general election on next November, of course. So 4 back-to-back elections starting this fall. From 2023, key updates. We launched a program in partnership with St. Vrain Valley School District and the Boulder Valley School District called, High School Voter Registration Awareness Week. We created this holiday or this week a couple of years ago, really to promote student civic engagement and awareness on opportunities to register and vote. We had another great year this year. BVSD is always a wonderful partner. Got lots of students registered and educated on how they can participate. We also had a great year at the legislature. We successfully passed a funding modernization bill. This was huge because the way that elections were funded was wildly outdated, and we were under-resourced in many ways. And so this helps catch up a little bit. Now we have more support from the state than we did in years previous. As mentioned, we will offer Spanish language voting again this year at in-person vote centers. We are installing more drop boxes in the county. And then, of course, as everyone knows, we will be implementing ranked choice voting for the first time for the city of Boulder. Okay, so ranked choice voting overview. Just for a little bit of context for those, I know most folks on this call know about this, but the voters decided in 2020 to elect the mayor using ranked choice voting. As soon as that ballot measure passed, we quickly got to work with the Colorado legislature to pass a bill that requires the Secretary of State to adopt rules and guidelines for the conduct of RCV elections. Since then, both the city of Boulder and Broomfield County have decided to had already decided or decided to conduct RCV this fall. So we're coordinating with them on a lot of this work as well. And a lot of what we've been doing this year is, I'll go over that in a second, but just preparing in coordination with the city, in coordination with Broomfield and the state, of how this is going to actually play out and what it's going to look like. It is a very big undertaking, and it does impact every facet of our elections. We have been looking at ballot design. What are our print procedures? How do we process the ballots? We've upgraded our voting system. We're in the thick of that right now. How are we conducting public testing of the ballots? How are we conducting testing of the equipment? How do we report the results? And of course, how do we educate voters? This is a big change in how they're going to be voting. And so we've been working really closely with the city to determine how to educate the voters on this big change. And then, of course, post-election audit as well. So at a high level, what we've been doing so far this year, first, I would say we have been we started securing our resources last year and the beginning of this year to help drive the planning and the implementation and the execution of the work. The Secretary of State did produce rules earlier this year that we reviewed, commented on, and started really, updating our own procedures and documentation and plans around. Like I mentioned, we have we're in the process of upgrading our voting system right now to install the new Trusted Build, which is the new software for ranked choice voting. And of course, communication planning has been a big part of that as well. So that's what we've been up to in terms of the implementation. Looking ahead for the rest of the year, it's about really finalizing those procedures because we're in the thick of testing right now. We'll be finalizing the procedures before we mail out ballots in September. And of course, thinking through how we're going to test differently for our public logic and accuracy test, how we're going to audit the contest as well, and how we're going to report the results. From a communication standpoint, I think I've covered a lot of this, but we feel that we've put a lot of great plans in place to really hit the ground running from this point forward with educating voters on these changes. We've developed in partnership with the city and county content for the website. We'll begin social media posts, and we know that the city of Boulder has the June, I believe, newsletter that's coming up. And so there's going to be some information included in there. And then we've also been working on our voter instructions since those go to print pretty soon. Again, this is going to be a big change. So we're really trying to promote this or think this through every angle that we can. Our plans include social media, press, TV, voter emails, inserts. We're thinking through how we translate all of this education and outreach to voters. We're also thinking of how we're training our judges because voters are going to walk into the vote centers with lots of questions. So again, we're really putting this layer of ranked choice voting on everything that we do and including it in all of our current communications and adding on new layers of communication specifically about ranked choice voting. I'm a little over time, so I just want to highlight that, other things that we're working on in addition to implementing the elections just is really centered around security. We've had great partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. As you all know, election officials and offices are facing threats. And so working through some of those suggestions from them of how we shore up our physical security spaces, how we respond to incidents, working to implement our cybersecurity program, and how we're preparing for emergency response as well. Mis and disinformation does continue to be a challenge. And so we just continue to say to everyone, if you hear something that doesn't sound right or feels inaccurate, please reach out to our office so we can work to escalate that to our appropriate contacts and hopefully get issues resolved before they spin out of control. So with that being said, I will leave it on this slide. It's always one thing we like to say, just go update, check your voter registration, make sure it's current, always include your email address so we can get folks on our email list as well. And then with everything that I've just gone over, most of this is completely open to the public. And so we would love for city council members to come to our ballot processing center tour this year. We will be talking about ranked choice voting and any other community members as well. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions that folks have. I know I went through that really quickly. Want to respect everyone's time. So.
Okay, I think Matt Benjamin is first up and then our mayor.
Thanks, Mark. Molly, thanks for being with us. And I'll first apologize because I talked way up Alicia's skills at bringing great food to our council meetings. So I'm sorry I said, hey, I'll see you in person and got you excited for the great food we get to eat to join us. So sorry it's virtual. That was on me.
Yeah, call me next week.
Will do. So I appreciate the presentation and also how quickly you and your team have really gone after that. So I thank you for that. And my questions are kind of maybe a little more in the weeds, not surprising since I've been knee deep in the RCV stuff for a while. So question on Ballot, have you is it your discretion or was that discretion of our Secretary of State with regards to the maximum number of mayoral candidates that you would fit on a ballot? I think in some previous conversations, I don't know the rules, like if 20 people were running for mayor, we probably would not be putting all 20 on a ballot. There would be some down selection. So is there some rule that says, hey, this is the maximum, and if there's 20 but only 7 make it on? Have you figured that out? Because I'm just curious about how ballots can sort of inflate and concern about just how many pages you guys are getting out there.
Yeah, we're really looking at how we're going to lay out this contest right now. There's a lot of different layout considerations, both from the what can you fit, what can the voting system support, what can the actual ballot card support, what's the best for scanning, what's the best for voters. So there's a lot of different ballot layout design considerations, generally speaking. I believe the voting system does have, we're required if there's 3 to do RCV, and I do believe that there is a limit to, I want to say that there's a limit to how much we can put on there, but I would need to validate that. But that is something that I would want to validate with our, voting systems team and SOS.
Okay, I appreciate it. Just, you mentioned misinformation, and some of that comes in the form of, oh, well, these ballots will just become infinitely long. And so I wanted to sort of help set that up, that they actually do have some constraints built into it. So I appreciate you looking back at that. The other one has to do with kind of pre and post surveys. Other communities that have embarked on this journey to sort of reform their elections have surveyed voters before and then surveyed voters afterwards. And so I didn't know if there was a coordination between you at the county or at our city level, or a broader coordination where we're surveying Broomfield and Boulder voters pre and post. So we really get a sense of how people are feeling about it, what's maybe left in terms of education, where we maybe missed, where we can do better. But overall, just sort of tell the story of how that works. So I didn't know if there was plan for that type of understanding of where voters are before and then maybe after the election.
Yeah, there's not been anything formal discussed. We are going to be doing extensive outreach and communications and events. And so we do plan to get feedback and solicit feedback that way. So we'll have some anecdotal information, but there won't be anything, at least on our end, we're not doing anything formal right now to solicit that input. But we will be saying, kind of doing a debrief post-election, and so would welcome any feedback from this group in terms of what you're hearing from voters. And voters should email us as well, letting us know, here's what, from our experience really met the mark in terms of the outreach. Here's what we could be doing differently. I think, we are looking at best practices with the city of Boulder, with Broomfield, reaching out to other states to get their experiences. But in terms of that direct feedback from voters, it's kind of going to be informal and anecdotal right now while we get our feet underneath us, and we'll certainly take feedback as we get it into future planning.
And I understand certainly how busy you guys are, so that's certainly a task that is lower on the priority list. I totally understand that. Would you be open to the city, working with you to take some of your load off? But would you be open to participating if the city were to initiate that kind of thing? And make, obviously make sure it's not on you. And I'm just throwing that out there as an idea to my colleagues. So make sure Elisha doesn't reach through and give me an upside the head as I maybe obligate her to a survey. But nonetheless, I just sort of curious if you'd be open to that, if we sort of worked together on that and took some of that burden, understanding, how much work you guys got to do to get to and through and past November.
Absolutely. We'll take all the information that we can get to make our elections and our process more inclusive, more voter centric, more voter friendly. We welcome that feedback.
If I may jump in there real quick, Molly and Matt, if that's okay. I just wanted to say, John and I have talked about surveying after the election. Unfortunately, what our biggest concern right now is education, because it is a totally new, different type of voting system. And so we are talking about after the election, possibly working with comms to maybe set up some sort of survey that we can send out with specific questions on how the election went, was it easy to follow and that sort of thing. So it is on our radar.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's all for my questions. Appreciate it, Molly. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor Brockett and then Nicole.
Well, Molly, thanks for being with us tonight. It's good to see you. And want to offer a little bit of an apology, but a very big thank you, because we put a big work item on your plate by adopting ranked choice voting, because that was our voters that did that. But really appreciate you stepping up and getting this done. This is not an easy task, so very appreciative there. My question is about, right, so we know in ranked choice voting, if you have more than 2 candidates and none of them get more than 50% on the first round, then you go to a second round, you drop off the lowest candidate vote getter, and then do the second round, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How is that going to end up getting reported out after the election? There's a lot of complexity there. So do you all know yet how that's going to end up getting in what you publicly report?
That's a great question. There are options, and right now we are evaluating those options and thinking through different impacts of, all the different ways that it could look. But we do know that we want to prioritize providing as much transparency to the public as what's happening as the ballots are being uploaded and results are being counted. And there's different tools that we're looking at to help support that. At a very basic level, we can produce a report. We're looking at how we can layer on more transparency to really demonstrate what's happening as the rounds progress. So I'm not prepared to commit or speak to exactly which path we're going down right now, but I can tell you those are really our guiding values as we make this determination, is providing the greatest amount of transparency to the public as early as possible. And so I would be happy to come back, at a later time once we have some of those details solidified and let council know how that's going to look.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I trust you all make fantastic decisions, and maybe that's something you could inform us about through an emailed report. As you figure that out, something like that might be a possibility. But thanks. That's all I have.
Nicole, you are up next.
Thank you. And thanks, Molly, for this presentation, as well as just for all these years of work to get us to this point. Appreciate it. My question is just around the sort of post-election day processing of ballots. And I was just wondering, in places that have made this switch to transition to ranked choice voting, have they seen a larger number of ballots that needed to be cured, or anything else to kind of suggest like places where additional education efforts might be helpful, or anything like that?
Good question. So in terms of curing a ballot, the opportunity to cure a ballot really occurs before the ballot is separated from its envelope. And so that's if a voter has a signature discrepancy or didn't, mark a signature. And so at that point in the process, the ballot has not been separated from its envelope, and that voter still has the right to cure their ballot. And they have until 8 days post-election day to do that and still have their ballot tabulated. But what I believe you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, is if there's more adjudication errors on a ranked choice voting contest than a non-RCV contest. And so, adjudication and improperly marked ballots are a big part of our process generally. We have so if a voter doesn't follow their voter instructions for whatever reason and makes an error on their ballot, and marks it out in some weird way and tries to correct it, what happens is that ballot will go to a bipartisan team of judges, a Republican and a Democrat, who will look at that ballot to determine voter intent. And so intent, and they'll work through that together to enfranchise the voter as much as possible. I don't know off the top of my head what the experience has been with RCV contest in other states. But what I do know is that the voter intent guide will, produce information on how our judges should be looking at that. And they will be following that, and we'll hopefully be able to provide that information after the election, at least if how it, implement or impacted Boulder County. But I don't know at other states what that was like. But as I talk to other states, I'll be sure to ask that question because it's a good one.
Yeah,
Can I colloquy on that? Just from when we were working on the ballot measure, we looked a little bit at that, and other states have done it more recently. But when we were looking in 2020, one thing that was noticed is the complaints that came on with regards to sort of that adjudicating part were that people realized that they only filled in one when they had the opportunity to fill in multiple, and then they were wanting to fix that. And that was a common complaint that I know was done in other places. I mean, I say common, it didn't happen a lot, but that was of the complaints, that was the one that sort of stuck out when we were doing our research. So I don't know if that helps answer your question a little bit there, Nicole, and appreciate you, Molly, for letting me sort of add a little bit of that, but that was what we heard.
Thanks. And Molly, thank you. And thank you also for teaching me new vocabulary word and the difference. I appreciate that. Good to know. But I think what would be really interesting to see is post-election, do we see a difference in the adjudication rates 2023 versus 2021, for example, or, even 2022, just something that can help us understand, do we have places where, we as a city can kind of do we need to continue doing more education over the next couple of years before our next ranked choice voting election? I personally would find that really helpful for us on council to be able to help our community make this transition.
Yeah, and we'll definitely, one of the things, I don't think I spoke to this, but it is on the slide, is we are going to produce a mock ballot later this summer to start, showing that to people and showing this is what a properly marked ballot looks like. Here's what, just so folks can really start getting used to it, because it does look different. And then on top of that, the voter instructions will include that as well. I know that a lot of folks don't necessarily read their voter instructions, so that's why we layer on all the other outreach as well. But would love your help in promoting that mock ballot that we'll have to voters so they can start getting a preview of it.
And also, just to jump in there and colloquy as well, we also have set up on our website, our ranked choice voting website, and we're working on that now. We have an interactive, sort of like a practice ballot for people to actually be able to go in and kind of play with. We've ran it by the county clerk's office and that team, and they approved it. And I think John, he's on the call as well. We're on the final stages of that. And we've also included that webpage with specific information in our, I would say, our preliminary setup of information that we're going to be handing out to voters at various areas in the city. And also we're going to be at festivals and different things like that, but they'll have that opportunity in person to kind of play with the ballot as well.
Can I call a quick question off of what you just said, Alicia? Well, will this be translated as well into Spanish as the ballot is now, Molly?
Which part, like the voter, like one thing that we're
the RCV instructions and education that's being done.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at right now, is how we like what we translate, how we translate it, and how we get it out. We are going to have a website about RCV that is also translated into Spanish. And so we're looking at all of the different things that because we're still developing. We've got a really good plan, but we're developing out what that looks like and how we translate it. But that would be a key component, is making sure that our materials are accessible in the Spanish language. Yeah.
In the absence of further questions, let me open this up for comments from council, if anyone has comments. There seem to be no comments. One, twice, very good.
I threw my hand up, Mark. I just wanted to say thank you to Molly for being with us and spending your time with us this evening. It's always good to see you. You have great information. Yeah,
thank you so much.
I think we all share that sentiment. Thank you so much for appearing before us and being so clear and informative. And on that, I think we will move to our next item.
The next item in this item, right, in item 2, which is the conversation on potential ballot items. And for that, Cara is going to kick us off.
Okay.
Thank you, Narian. Good evening, Council. Cara Skinner, Chief Financial Officer. And as the presentation is being brought up, this is an update that we talked about back in May when we had our first discussion with regard to ballot measures. And tonight it really is an update. And I'll just keep talking. I'm gonna first kick it off back to Alicia, and she's gonna give you an update. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. She's gonna give you an update on the community-sponsored city petitions, and then it will kick back to me, and I will provide you an update on the really the polling with regard to the potential extension of the 0.15% sales and use tax. And then I will kick it over to Wendy Schwartz from Housing and Human Services, who will provide you a little follow-up information as requested in May with regard to the potential future behavioral health tax and potential uses of that. So that is the agenda for the second segment, and I will kick it over to Alicia Johnson, our city clerk.
All right, thank you so very much, Cara. Emily, if you would go to the next slide, please. Next slide. As we know, we received 2 citizen initiative petitions in the city clerk's office. The first one we will cover with this slide is the Safe Zones for Kids. It's a petition requesting to amend the BRC Chapter 8-3-21, prohibiting items, adding the particular chapter as cited below, which would be an additional Chapter C. On March 1st, 2023, the petition was approved for circulation by me, and on that particular day, they elected to utilize both the online petitioning system and paper petitions. On June 15th, 2023, I certified the petition sufficient with a total of 3,784 valid signatures. Those signatures were gathered both online and in person. And as you see here by the figures as they are broken down, 3,301 of those were obtained by the paper petitions and 483 were obtained by the Boulder Direct Democracy online system. This petition would not have been deemed sufficient without the 483 valid signatures utilized through the BDDO. Next slide, Emily. The second petition that came to the city clerk's office for validation was the extension of the existing 0.15% sales use tax to support arts, culture, and heritage. This petition was seeking to renew and extend the 0.15% sales tax used to actually fund the arts and culture initiatives. Now, that petition was submitted for review and was approved by circulation by me on May the 4th of 2023. They also elected to utilize the online petitioning system and paper petitions. And June 15th, their petition was certified sufficient with a total of 3,560 valid signatures. Again, both gathered both online and in person. You'll see that 3,153 signatures were obtained by paper petitions and 407 through the BDDO system. And again, this petition would not have been deemed sufficient without the utilization of the BDDO. I'm gonna turn it back over to Cara.
Thanks, Alicia. Next slide. So going to the potential ballot measure regarding the expiring 0.15% sales and use tax. Next slide, and thank you, Emily, for advancing slides. As directed by council, we did engage a expert polling firm, Probalski Research, and they are going to perform a statistically significant survey for us. And the survey, as intended, is to provide really valuable information to council as they contemplate placing a ballot measure on this November's election. And so really wanting to ask thoughtful questions that will provide really good information for council to consider. The survey will be statistically significant. It'll be both phone and online. The phone survey will be both landline and mobile, and the online survey will be accessed by invitation through a text message or via email. The poll will be in English and Spanish. We are expecting to be beginning the poll next week, so end of July or end of June into early July. And what are we testing? We're only testing the 0.15% sales and use tax extension. Back in May, when we talked about potential ballot measures, there were two other measures that council considered that night. Council compensation changes, as well as a potential behavioral health tax. And the determination that night was that did not want to consider either of those items for this November's election, but there might be potential interest for a future election. And so we heard direction to poll on those, but in discussion with our with Probolsky Research, they recommended we hold on those two items and not have it be part of this polling. And really that was informed by if those two questions or one of them would be on a future election, in fact, a even year election, the voter profile is very different than the voter profile for this November odd year election. And so they want to ask questions that are really relevant for this voter profile. So we'll be testing only the 0.15% sales tax extension. And the survey is really going to focus on gauging overall sentiment and then sentiment regarding specific city services. And those city services really are focused on general fund funded services, since this is an expiring general fund, general purpose tax, as well as some, recent community and council priorities. It's going to be an opportunity for voters to share their priorities. It will specifically test ballot language, and that ballot language that will be tested is really taken from the prior ballot that was approved by voters 20 years ago, with some updates to reflect current service delivery. And that testing of the ballot language will first begin with what is sort of considered an uninformed test, and then the survey respondents will be provided some additional information in the form of questions, and then the ballot language will be retested. So it's sort of considered and provides information to council about the results in an uninformed and then with more information or informed. And then last, we plan to test a 20-year extension versus a no sunset. We did discuss back in May, maybe 20 years, 30 years, and no sunset. And the on the advice of our consultants, they say the results would likely not be very different between 20 years and 30 years. And so recommended we just test 20 years versus no sunset. They also recommended in the no sunset ballot language testing to say until future voter action, because frankly, any tax could be modified by future voter action, but then it sort of informs them of that. So we're working through that. And I think that's the end of this. Next slide. Oh yeah, next steps. So as noted, June, July, we're going to launch the poll. We are scheduled to come back to you on July 20th for first reading of ballot measures. We are anticipating putting multiple versions on the consent calendar for council consideration. And then that evening, we're also anticipating presenting the polling results. If we get the results in advance of July 20th, but very likely after the agenda item materials are due, we would send out those polling results to council via hotline, so you can see those in advance of the meeting. And then in August, we have both a second reading and then a placeholder for a potential third reading if needed. And then just a reminder, as Molly noted, that information is due to the county by September 8th. Next slide. So next, as we talked about, or I mentioned earlier, back in May, we did talk about the potential for a future behavioral health tax ballot measure, and there was some request from council for some follow-up information. So next slide. Just as a reminder, what was discussed was a potential tax on 3 items, tobacco, liquor, and a potential additional increment of tax on marijuana. And this is just a reminder of the revenue estimates that we had put together that this type of tax might generate. And then I'll go to next slide and hand it over to Wendy, as she will give you that follow-up information.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Wendy Schwartz, Housing and Human Services. Based on Council direction at the May 11th meeting, we did do some work on refining examples of potential uses of funds under a behavioral health tax ballot measure. And those examples are shown on this slide. The ideas are based on efforts the city already has underway or maximizing plans of community partners working in behavioral health. The first two items are related to the planned Homeless Services Day Center, specifically on-site clinician services, as well as prescriber services on-site for behavioral health medication management. The next item is related to an interagency group here in the county, the high utilizer team that has been working on solutions for people that have very heavy interaction across multiple services and systems. There's a preliminary proposal from this group that covers supportive services, including behavioral health services, that would also be a potential use for this city tax. And council is going to hear more about the overall high utilizer team proposal via an information packet in August. And finally, Mental Health Partners, which is our local behavioral health safety net service provider, has received a state grant for capital expenses for a space to consolidate and expand a variety of acute care services, including services like intensive and residential substance use disorder treatment that we know are of great interest and demand locally. And city behavioral health tax funds could leverage those funds to increase the size of service expansion with more beds, more services, and higher levels of care. So happy to take any questions.
I think that is our cue, Council. Matt, you seem to, oh.
We could take the presentation down, I think.
I appreciate you touching on some of that new work that you've done, Wendy, with the team on the potential use of the behavioral health tax. The question I have is those three uses, being it sort of the behavioral health clinician, behavioral health medication management, and sort of the high utilizer behavioral health support. Are those are those not being done at all unless this money is secured, or are they done just paid for differently, or are they going to be sort of applied to the day service center but just at a much lower level? So can you explain like where they may or may not exist without this sort of tax in going forward?
Absolutely. So with regards to the services that are referenced at the day center, then there's going to be on the basic behavioral health services, there's going to be some basic services planned through existing programs there. So there are some programs like one actually Judge Cook referenced earlier in her presentation called BHAP, or the Behavioral Health Assistance Program. So that's a jail transition program. And I know that the staff planning the day center have already had some discussions with those types of services interfacing with the day services. There's the building home retention team, which includes behavioral health support, which will be connected to the day center. And our staff in HHS also is including those services in some additional applications for state funding. We think that we can make some arrangements with mental health partners, as was done with the CRC, for possible telehealth services. And of course, there's, what is done across the community already in terms of referrals to mental health partners for needed services in the community. In terms of the medication management on site, I think that there's not a current specific plan that connects funding to that service. But that doesn't mean that one can't be developed with another source of funding. It's just not there yet. In reference to the high utilizer behavioral health support, that plan, we've got kind of some interesting timing issues with this discussion, because that is a plan that's still really gelling in that group. And as I referenced, that's something that council's going to be hearing more about through an IP in August. And so that, the funding of that entire plan, which will go beyond just the behavioral health support, is something that's going to have to be investigated if all of the partners agree to that plan.
If I can add to that, Wendy, I apologize, council member, but I think Wendy spoke to that really well. I'll note too that plan, and we're trying to be a little thoughtful to our partners because we're still vetting that, and there's a lot of partners involved in that work. The county mental health partners, the DA's office, certainly a variety of staff from different departments. There's just a lot of people, and what they have learned are both not just what services can we give some of our most chronic folks that are the most difficult to serve, but through that, what can we learn about the gaps in the systems that exist? And what can that group really bring up to deal with those gaps as we're doing? And some of those will be legislative thoughts, some of those will be some additional types of funding. And so the package we want to share with all of our partners, because it will not just be a City of Boulder initiative. This really is a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency, public-private partnership that is super thoughtful and thorough. And that's why I think you'll get more information about that as we move forward. But want to thank Wendy for really flagging that as a potential use, because right now it has no funding, and we're going to be really, if we want to make a dent in some of the critical problems we're facing, we're going to have to really think, all of us, not just the City of Boulder, but all of us, about funding this.
Thank you for that context, Marianne. Those are all my questions. I'll just sort of maybe just finish on a with regards to just the county here is the sort of the elephant in the room with regards to their discussion of potential behavioral health tax. So we're adding fractions to what their capacity is. So I'd hope that we continue to keep them moving in the right direction as that serves our greatest needs, and we can be complementary to that.
Bob, you have questions?
No, just kind of a question, but just to elicit a advertisement. This is something for Alicia. We talked about the two resident initiatives, and the city initiated 0.15 sales tax. What we did not talk about, and I know we won't need to pull on this, but I want to just for completeness of record for anyone's watching, we do have a fourth ballot measure initiated by the city, and that's a charter cleanup. Alicia, can you refer to that as well?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Bob. The charter cleanup is part of our internal council requested type initiatives, and those will be presented to council with the first reading of the ballot measures. The CAO's office is working on that now to draft those ordinances, but our thought tonight was to bring you the update on just if the petitions were certified and if they were not certified. But we are working on the charter cleanup and the other initiatives brought forth by the charter committee.
Thank you, Alicia.
I do not see any other questions. Do we have comments? I do not see any further comments. In which case, thank you so much, Wendy, Kara, Nuria. It was very informative, great presentation. And I look forward to further work on all of these matters. I guess we are moving on to our last item for the evening, but I want to solicit interest in a 5-minute break if anybody would be interested. Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By a bare majority. We are going to have a break. We're going to reconvene at 8:23.
Alicia, make sure to put that in the action summary as a 5-4 vote. please.
You got it, Mayor.
Okay.
Nuria, I will turn it over to you once again for introductions.
Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem. And I'm super excited for the next item. I know for some it is a dry one, but for others it is really critical as we're trying to meet our climate goals in the city of Boulder. So I'm going to send it over to our Director of Planning and Development Services, Brad Mueller, to kick us off and do some introductions of his own.
Thanks, Miriam. I am in fact going to introduce a couple new faces to you. Excited not only for this evening's discussion, but in the case of Rob, excited to round out, actually Rob and Josh, rounding out our building division staffing. We're in a much better place than we were not all that long ago. Josh Hansen is going to be making the presentation this evening. Josh is our Energy Code Compliance Examiner and joined us about 6-7 months ago. He's hit the ground running, has just an incredible background in these matters and incredible passion. We're lucky to have him with us. And then I'd also like council to welcome Rob Adrians. Rob is our new Chief Building Official. I think you all know how we've struggled a bit to get that position filled, but Rob's jumped in now 6 weeks and is doing a great job, and we're happy to have him with us too. We also have the folks from Climate Initiatives, Carolyn Elam and Jonathan, going to speak to items as well as myself as questions come up. So, Rob, I didn't know if you wanted to introduce Josh or go straight to Josh, but I'll turn it over briefly. Maybe you can introduce yourself and background real briefly.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Oh. Seems to have frozen here. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your having us this evening. I'm Rob Adrians. I was previously the Chief Building Official up in Weld County, so I've just jumped across I-25 to the other side here, so I'm excited to be here. With that, I'll just hand it off to Josh. He'll be presenting tonight on our energy code. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen now to put up my presentation. All right, let me.
Josh, while you're pulling that up, maybe we want to introduce Sally.
Yes. Yep. Let me. So wanted to go ahead and introduce two of our consultants that are actually on the call as well that are going to help us with this update. We've got Sally Blair with Noresco and Robbie Schwartz with Build Tank also on the call, and they're going to be helping us as we work through this process of updating our energy code. So let me go ahead and pull up your presentation.
There you go.
I can. 1 second. Where is it going? Let me close something real quick and pull it back up. Apologies for.
No worries, Josh, and let us know if you'd prefer that we handle it from a different way.
Not a problem. Thank you. Let's see here.
Josh, you might unshare and then try resharing just the presentation. It's just showing your desktop.
Oh, I know. I'm opening it up on another screen.
Okay, great.
Yeah. That's strange. Okay. Let me. It's not. Yeah, hold on 1 second. Yeah, let me unshare and reshare. I apologize for this. We use a lot more of Teams, so I'm. All right, 1 second. All right, let's go ahead and reshare. No, I'm good. It disconnected real quick. The PowerPoint was showing up on my screen that's over to my left. That's not there. Gotta love technology. Okay, then we will do it the old-fashioned way. So let me pull up my presentation and we'll go from there.
Were you trying to get fancy, Josh? Is that's what's backfiring?
So no, we're actually over here at Park Central on the second floor, and I had my second monitor up in front of me, and it basically just went down. So let's try this one more time. If it doesn't work, oh, there we go. All right. Okay, there we go. Now we're up. All right, let's try this again. Please work. All right. So we got that there. Play.
Fortunately, we're still seeing your desktop.
Yeah, apologies.
No.
I'm
Josh,
usually I
if you
have
want to quick email it to me or the clerks, we can.
Yeah, if
we
the
can
clerk's
try.
team
here.
doesn't
I got
have
it. I was trying to use dual monitors so I could pull up some notes on one screen, but I just won't use my note screen. So I don't really need it. But all right. Let's do it with one screen. Go. Okay, let's do this. All right, let me email it to you. I apologize for this. As you can see, I'm pulling it up and it's going off my screen to the left here.
All right. So our clerks team says they have it. So
Okay,
Emily, if
okay,
you could
perfect.
bring that up for us.
Perfect.
Yes,
That
I
way,
will
Josh.
bring that up right now.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank
Josh,
you.
that way you
Sorry.
have your notes handy if you do need them. Thank you.
Yep, I do.
You may have to stop sharing. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, there we go.
Great.
Okay. All righty. So apologies for any technical inconvenience. So I'm Josh Hansen, the Energy Code Compliance Principal Examiner here at the City of Boulder. And we wanted to go ahead and do a quick introduction for our Energy Code Development Project. Please advance the slide. And click through it. Yeah. All right, there you go. You're good. And so this item really is an introduction, a high-level introduction to our 2024 Boulder Energy Conservation Code Development Project. As many of you may be aware, by 2030, we're targeting a reduction in carbon emissions of 70%. By 2035, looking to be a net zero when it comes to carbon emissions, and then looking to be carbon positive by 2040, or in which case, buildings are actually able to absorb more carbon dioxide than they produce. And so before we really jump into this, this code development project, I wanted to look back at kind of the history of how we got here and go from there. Please advance the slide. And then click through a couple more times. Keep going. Keep going. And a couple more times. One more. And then one, all right. So let's start with the residential energy code map. So before I really want to dive into this, just so everyone's aware, the energy code really pertains to buildings, residential and commercial buildings. And so I know there's some other items that will come up as we discuss this, but the primary focus really on this is to look at residential and commercial buildings with respect to energy code. And so as we jump into, back right there, perfect. So as we jump into the history of kind of how we got here, we want to understand really what's the definition of a residential building, just to make sure that everyone's on the same plane. And so when we refer to a residential building, we're talking about a 1 or 2 family dwelling, as well as townhomes and R3 or R4 occupancies. And R3 and R4 occupancies, R3, think of them as dormitories or sororities. R4 is going to be basically an R3 occupancy with some additional requirements, like say an alcohol awareness facility, something like that. And so 2017 was really our first dive into our own energy code here at the City of Boulder. And so what we really looked at doing first was looking at some of the larger homes that were really coming through the city to make sure that they could do the right thing and really have a lesser impact. And so we made a requirement to have those at net zero. On the 2020 COBEC, so the most recent version that we're actually currently on, we decided to tighten those reins a little bit and actually look at making houses that were equal to or greater than 3,000 square feet be net zero. And so one thing to note on this is the majority of the homes that we've seen come through the city that are great, that the majority of them are going to be greater than 3,000 square feet. So they're already at net zero. And so just wanted to touch on that so everyone can be aware of that. Also, some other things that were introduced with the COBEC this time around are the City of Boulder Energy Conservation Code. If you see COBEC, that's what we're referring to. Is we had it in some performance backstops. So these performance backstops are really items that you cannot trade away. And so These items are typically your envelope items or the exterior of the building. So we're looking at the insulation values, window values, things of that nature. And backstops basically meaning if our code says you have to do it, you can't go to a lesser version of that, which when we are modeling and doing energy models for this, you're able usually to trade below and above on things. So that's why we have these backstops in place that you can't go below those numbers. We also introduced solar ready and solar offset requirements for residential. So solar ready, we basically require 300 square feet on the roof to be available for future solar panels. And then on the offset requirements, what we have is anything that's heating outside of the building that really uses a fossil fuel as its heating source has to be fully offset through renewables. And then the last thing that we really introduced with the 2020 COBEC was making EV ready requirements for on the single family side. So next page, please. So here we wanted to really look at kind of where we came from with the commercial energy and where we're kind of going, which is what we'll talk about in here in a little bit. And so the first thing I want to define really is what is a commercial building? A commercial building, please go ahead and click through a couple of them. So commercial building is basically defined as any buildings that are not residential. So we always love the building code definitions, right? So anything that's not residential. Click it again. This also is actually going to include multifamily R2 occupancies, which is becoming more common, it seems like, here in the state of Colorado. And so R2, most people think of that as, well, it's residential. And so with a lot more of the codes that we're seeing, more multifamily is moving under the commercial umbrella, just because the International Building Code, or the IBC, actually governs multifamily construction. So that's why we're seeing this change and move over into the commercial spectrum. So please click a couple more times. And so with the 2014 COBEC, we really wanted to look at where we could start with our energy code and where we kind of look to move it in the future. And so the 2017 COBEC was developed off of the 2012 energy code, the International Energy Code. And so looking at that, the city decided to look at using one of the metrics that's used for the energy code, which is this ASHRAE 90.1-2010 standard. And so instead of just taking the standard at face value, which the requirement typically is to be at 0% better or better than what's required, we decided to say, no, that's not enough for what we're trying to do here in the city, and we required a 30% savings above that target. Click again, please. And so one of the other items we actually introduced here also was the solar ready requirements for these commercial buildings. Please click again a couple of times. And so the 2020 COBEC, what we did was we actually looked to up the ante on these energy savings requirements, and we looked at requiring 20 to 25% savings, which it's lower than the 30% savings, but we're also measuring it against a 2016 baseline versus a 2010 baseline, which is going to be a lot more stringent. The other thing to note here is the mention of an EUI savings. So EUI stands for energy use intensity. And so think of this as miles per gallon for a commercial building. On the residential front, you'll hear the term ERI, which is energy rating index. And so it's the same thing there. It's basically miles per gallon on a single family home. Please click, I think, about 3 more times. And so some other things that were introduced in this code as well, as we talked about previously with residential, is we had performance backstops that were in place. We also required solar to have a 5% energy offset for any commercial building. So when the buildings are built and modeled, of that energy usage, a minimum of 5% has to be offset by active solar on site. And then the last thing that we really upped the ante on, I want to say, is we brought in electric vehicle capable, ready, and EVSE requirements under the 2020 COBEC. And please click the next slide. So here's a quick timeline on this. So we've already met with the planning board on the 6th of this month. We previously met with the Environmental Advisory Board on the 7th of this month. And then currently we are meeting with City Council to get your feedback. And as we progress through this presentation, I'm going to try and touch on some of the feedback we got from the planning board as well as the Environmental Advisory Board as we filter through this presentation. So apologies in advance because I don't have my notes up in front of me. But please feel free to click through the rest of this slide. So currently we're meeting with the City Council tonight to discuss this project. The next steps really are going to be stakeholder engagement, right there, stakeholder engagement. And so we're going to look at engaging the community as well as different stakeholders to get their feedback on the process as we work through it. And on the different items for energy efficiency to make sure that it's in line with, what the community and the stakeholders are thinking, as well as what the city envisions for their future. And then lastly, or not lastly, but the next step really will be, once we have the draft code, is to bring it back to planning, the environmental advisory board, as well as city council, and have them review and basically look to approve. And then during the fourth quarter of this year, we're really targeting to do the initial public reading of this energy code to get to just move the project along really and get additional feedback and hopefully adoption and implementation. So next slide, please. So here are the areas of focus that we're really going to look at in this presentation. Please do a couple more clicks. And so the first two areas of focus that I really want to look at are going to be dealing with our performance targets for our energy code. So basically looking at, making our buildings more energy efficient as we look to move to net zero energy, as well as net zero carbon. And then part 3, 4, and 5, or excuse me, part 2 is an alternative pathway that we're considering looking at for residential compliance. And then part 3, 4, and 5 really pull everything full circle as we talk about electrification, natural gas offsets, and then look at really embodied carbon reduction and overall carbon reduction in this process. Next slide, please. So the first item I really wanted to touch on here is our performance target updates. And please feel free to click through. All right, keep going until you move to the next slide, then you can back up. All right, perfect. So the proposed code updates that we're going to be doing on this one really is for the residential buildings. As we mentioned previously, we already require anything greater than 3,000 square feet to be net zero energy. And we're considering leaving that at that metric, because the majority of the new build homes that come in for permit that are greater than 3,000 square feet, the majority of them are already requiring this net zero energy requirement. For the homes that are less than 3,000 square feet, we're really looking to kind of revisit these targets and look at different avenues really to make it available and make energy efficiency available for those that may not be able to build these 3,000 square feet homes, and just kind of really focus on that. The other piece too that's kind of goes hand in hand with this, as well as our existing buildings, because of Boulder having such a large existing building stock. We really want to look at incorporating more of that into our energy code to help customers, help the community, help stakeholders, really guide them through our code to kind of know really what's going to be expected and kind of move that needle further along for the city's vision. On the commercial front, we have basically 3 pathways through energy code, excuse me. The model baseline path is basically our first pathway. And this one is you model a building and it gives you a certain energy savings. And so we have to model our building that we're proposing and make sure that it is under that baseline savings. And so what we're looking on this path really is to consider updating this percentage reduction. As we currently sit, as I mentioned, we're at 20% for all electric buildings. And then if it's a mixed fuel building, or a building that uses electricity as well as natural gas, then we require a 25% reduction. So we're evaluating those numbers to see, do we leave them there and change the baseline? Do we move the percentages and make them more, a higher reduction requirement and be around the same baseline, and so on? And so these are some of the things we're thinking through at this process. The next item is our fixed baseline path. And so a sample of this really is on the image here to the left. And so the items that are in blue are the current building types that we have available in our energy code that has a static target. So as you can see under the 2020 COBEC column, there are numbers there. And so those numbers are our EUI, our energy use intensity target, as I mentioned. And so this is very much a static number, to where you could open the code book and go, oh, for a 10,000 square foot office building, I need to be at a 23. And so you'd know that with modeling and that, you'd have to get below a 23. The one thing that you may notice here too is that there's about, I believe, 6 items or 6 building types that are currently included in these performance targets. And I believe this probably was due to the fact that with this being a newer kind of avenue that we've seen over the recent years, there may not have been a ton of data that really was available at the time, or that was powerful, or from the city's perspective, we may not have seen a ton of other building types really outside of this. And we were looking to dip our toe into the water and really put some pen to paper and figure out some building types that we could give, more of a static target versus a moving number, which is really the modeled baseline path, and it pertains specifically to buildings. So on this fixed baseline path, what we're looking to do is update the EUI targets. You know, as you can see from 2017 to 2020, we've tightened the targets. Now it's not a ton because we want to do it gradually. We have till about 2030 to do this. And so we want to make sure we understand the cost behind everything and make sure that, you know, we take you to the point of law of diminishing return to where we can get you there. But if we go any further, it's really, you're losing some value there. And so we're looking to kind of weigh all these things as we look at this. And as I mentioned, we're going to update the EUI targets as well as adding additional building types to this as well. As you can see, you know, retail was an example, or low-rise apartments, or even large offices. You know, we currently don't have those, as you can see the question marks, but these are some things that we're really going to be considering as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home option here is one that we're proposing as an alternative to the residential piece. And so this program's been around for about 10 years. And I believe as of today, there's about between, I want to say 25 to 30,000 homes that have been certified, if not are in the process of being certified through this program. And so some of the strengths for the Zero Energy Ready Home, feel free to click through this till the next slide and then just back up one. So the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home is really built on the backbone of the Energy Star New Homes program. And so the reason for me thinking of this as kind of being an option as an opportunity is, you know, for homes that are larger than 3,000 square feet, they're already requiring net zero. And so this program is great because it focuses on energy efficiency, as you can see from the Energy Star requirements, as well as the 2021 envelope backstop and the Energy Star windows. It also requires Energy Star appliances, but inclusive of the EPA Indoor Air Plus certification. So the first, the first three items, the Energy Star certification, the envelope requirements, and the windows really kind of pertain back to the Energy Star certification and the energy efficiency of the home. The other aspect that's a little different from Energy Code really is the EPA Indoor Air Plus certification. So this is an additional certification that's required for this program. The benefit here is that we're not only providing the customers, the community, with these homes that are going to be energy efficient but healthy. They're going to have a healthy indoor environment. Some of the interesting aspects too to this Zero Energy Ready Home is that it requires the HVAC system to be entirely within thermal envelope. Some of the systems, as some of you may be aware, is it may be up in your attic, it may be in your crawl space if you have a crawl space. And so those have to be brought into conditioned space now of the home. It also was one of the first programs to introduce this PV ready checklist. So it's one of the very first programs that had the solar ready requirements, hence the name Zero Energy Ready. And then it also introduced recently EV ready requirements, as well as electric ready heat pump, water heating, and space heating requirements as well have been introduced to this program. So with that being said, the primary reason for looking at this really is not so much for the homes that are greater than 3,000 square feet, as this could still apply to those homes. The difference would be is they still have to install solar to get to where they need to get to. But for the folks that can't afford to maybe do that aspect of it, this program has a ton of incentives that are available out there. And so the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last year has some incentives that are available through that program to help homeowners offset some of this additional cost, or by the end of the project, really convince them to consider putting on solar and getting to net zero themselves, and kind of empowering them to do that. So next slide, please. So we just touched on the first two areas of focus, which really dealt with our energy efficiency. Put two more times, or three more times, I think. Oh, two more, sorry. Back one. So we just touched on the first two areas that really deal with our energy efficiency. And so the next three pieces are really going to look at more of the carbon aspect and kind of carbon reduction. And so next slide, please. So click through. All right, and then back one. All right, perfect. So with electrification, what we're really looking to introduce and consider is for new construction or level 4 alterations, we want to look at requiring all electric space and water heating, as well as have electric ready requirements for other appliances like stoves, for example. So for anyone that's wondering, a level 4 alteration is basically the step before they want to scrape the site and build it as new construction. So that's why we lump that in up there. A level 3 alteration is basically if you're doing over 50% of work in a building. and it extends over 50% of the building area, that would trigger a level 3 alteration. So to give you some context. So for level 3, what we would look to do is, because they're not doing as much work as new construction or level 4, we'd really want to encourage electric ready on these types of buildings and encourage them to install breakers and panel space and the raceways to be able to run this upon, future installation of a electric piece of equipment. And the way we consider incentivizing this is for an ERI target or an energy rating index, or the miles per gallon on a home, instead of it being, say, a ERI of 50, we would give an allowance of, say, a 55 on this to really help encourage and make it less painful for them to really push the envelope and do electric ready on this. And so just to make note of that as we kind of dive into this is, there are currently 2 municipalities here in the state of Colorado that are, well, let's talk about the first one. So Crested Butte's the first municipality in Colorado to require all electric new construction. And so following suit right behind them is actually Denver, as many of you may be aware. And starting January 1 of 2024, no natural gas, space, or water heating will be allowed to be installed in multifamily or commercial construction. Now, that being said, there are exceptions. So that is the one key thing about how they're kind of maneuvering around that currently. But I want to make mention of that because, we're looking at being one of the next municipalities to hopefully look at adopting electrification as a possibility in the future. And so some other areas I wanted to really touch on as well, because I know this is really hits home to here in Boulder, is our EV charging requirements. Last week, actually, I think it was last week or the week before, the model state code came out for solar ready and for electric ready requirements for the buildings here in Colorado. And so the EV charging requirements are right there in that same standard. We currently we're in compliant about 90%. We're off. I think we have a 10% requirement for our EV capable or EV ready, excuse me, and the state now requires 15%. But from the boards that we've already actually talked to, we are getting a lot of echoes of we need to really consider upping the total on those. And so that's something we really want to look at, is really considering the EV charging requirements. And then also I wanted to mention that with respect to kind of smaller lots, we're looking at really, I think currently it requires 25 spaces or greater, or 25 spaces or less. And so what we're really looking at doing is bringing that down to, I think it was 10 spaces or less, to really kind of focus on making these impacts and being able to provide this infrastructure and this EV charging as we look towards the future and kind of our goals and our vision with the city. And the last piece is the e-bike charging. And so as you become more and more aware of it, probably here in the city, is that e-bikes are everywhere now. And so what we really want to do is take that into strong consideration, especially say for multifamily or projects of that type, and really kind of consider any EV bike charging requirements to help really pave the way in that direction as well. So next slide, please. Keep going. And back. Okay, perfect. And so for part 4, which is the other side of the coins that we'll say here, so we just talked about electrification. The next piece we want to look at is our solar offsets of natural gas. And so what we're looking to propose is on the residential side, really want to provide more guidance on what would be required when we talk about natural gas offsets. Currently, we require any heating that's outside of the home or the dwelling unit that's a fossil fuel to be 100% offset by renewables. But the question comes up on, well, what about electric resistance heating for a patio, or some other type of outdoor heating? And so we're looking to really help provide some more guidance on that front. We've also heard echoes from one of the board meetings that to really consider looking at natural gas offsets, even in the home, not just outside of the home for single family. And so that's something too that I want to say that we're going to be weighing out and considering. On the commercial front, as we mentioned earlier, 5% energy offsets required through solar for just the energy use in the building. What we're really considering and looking to push is if the building is going to be using mixed fuel, say it's a laboratory where they have burners and things of that nature, if it's going to have to be mixed fuel, then we're looking at wanting to require 100% offset of that natural gas use. So we know that there are certain instances that it's inevitable that natural gas may have to be used. And so in those instances, we just want to make sure that it's be able to be fully 100% offset. And the first thing that comes to mind in some aspects is like a commercial kitchen or something like that, of that nature. And so the last slide, please, or the next slide, excuse me. And so going, stop, perfect. All right, so this last piece really is bringing us kind of full circle. So part 1 and part 2 really talked about more of the operational carbon, as we mentioned here on this slide. And this piece really pulls it in full circle, and we talk more about the embodied carbon aspect. And so before I really go down that avenue, I just want to clarify one thing. And so whenever we talk about carbon in terms of this embodied carbon reduction, we're really referring to carbon dioxide, or in this example, it'd be CO2 and then a small e at the end of it for embodied carbon, or embodied, or O for operational. And so as you can see from the definitions, we really have 2 types of carbon. We have operational carbon, which is basically once the building gets turned over, you get your CO, it goes into full operation. It deals with the management, the processes, any maintenance items, and everything that's basically on the operational side of the building and its functioning, and the carbon dioxide it produces. The embodied carbon is really anything from the extraction of those materials up to the certificate of occupancy for that building. So it can include extraction, transportation, manufacture of these materials, installation, construction processes, many different things. As you can see from the image here, operational carbon's about, I think we looked at it earlier, and it was about, it's a lot smaller portion than the embodied carbon piece, really, as what it takes to get up to that final piece, that final stage. And one thing to note too is buildings, I want to say, and I apologize, I don't have my notes right in front of me, but buildings account for about 39% of the global greenhouse gas, or the greenhouse gas emissions. And about a quarter of those are actually due to embodied carbon. And so this is really why this is something that we really want to look at and focus on, because it's something that we can actually impact. So next slide, please. All right. And right there, perfect. So there are a couple of things we can look at when we talk about embodied carbon. And of course, many of us have probably may or may not have heard of a life cycle assessment or a life cycle analysis. And so this is a similar to an energy model, but we look at the environmental impact of the building over the useful life of it, right? So all the products, materials, processes, basically cradle to grave on that building to see how it impacts the environment. Up above, you'll see that there's about 5 categories that we would really consider low-hanging fruit when we look at embodied carbon. And so what we're looking at and considering here is, with mention of the life cycle assessment, consideration of looking at possibly requiring certain building types or certain buildings of a certain size to, say, provide a life cycle assessment, or consideration of maybe having a prescriptive path that if you don't want to do a life cycle assessment, then you have these 5 categories above, you've got to pick 2 categories or 3 categories and comply with those. And as we see, it's really comes down to a lot of thoughtful selection on your products and your materials you're going for. So like we see concrete mix and rebar, it really just comes down to thoughtful selections and with those materials, and it's just having that forethought up front to really make those choices and those requests to ensure that we comply, or that they're able to comply. Next slide, please. All right, keep going. Stop, perfect. All right, so our next steps on this project is to incorporate the feedback that we heard from the planning board, the environmental advisory board, and city council, look to engage our stakeholders in the community, look at possibly having some in-house or open house, meetings with some stakeholders in the community, look at using some of the different lists that we have to reach out and get some feedback to really engage the community. Because at the end of the day, my intent for this code is really, it's the city's code, and it's going to be the community's code. So once we have all that feedback, we really look to incorporate the feedback and recommendations, look at drafting the 2024 COBAC in the 3rd quarter of this year, and then bring it back to the planning board, environmental advisory, and city council, really to get your feedback, any tweaks or changes that you feel that we need, or if there's anything that we fully missed that you think that we need to revisit and look at, and then hopefully have our first public reading by the 4th quarter of 2023. Next slide, please. And so one more. Thank you. And so to bring it back, kind of back around to the beginning again, I just wanted to look at these areas one more time before we go in and really look at some of the key questions that we're here to ask about from City Council. And so just please keep these in mind as we look at the next slide, and we can jump back here in a second if we need to. So next slide, please. And 3 more. So what I'm really here and want to ask is, yeah, does the City Council agree on the proposed areas of focus that we have for the 2024 COBAC? Is there any areas that you see that we should also include that we just aren't currently? And then from the City Council's perspective, do you have any recommendations on any community engagement strategies for this project? We're really looking to expand and get feedback from everyone in regards to the community engagement piece, just to make sure that everyone that wants to be heard can be heard. And so that, I believe, is all I have. And so I want to say thank you all for this opportunity to speak to you on this topic, and I'm open for questions and discussion.
All right, for questions, and let's lead off with Lauren.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to have some, to no one's surprise, I will have some specific questions here. With the target, the EUI targets for commercial energy usage, I was wondering if we've looked at if there are any more standardized codes that do a similar thing. As fun as reinventing the wheel is and doing something different than what everybody else is doing, if there are things like if the International Green code touches on that, I feel like, have we looked at that? Other similar codes in that area?
Yeah, and that's what we'll plan to do when we look to update our EUI targets, is to look to those different standards. I know that, like you said, IGCC is one of them. I know NBI has one that's out there that's available as well, that's got some good information and data behind it. And then also, as I've mentioned, our consultants in Noresco have worked across the country in many of the different municipalities. They've been the boots on the ground in California in their wars, and then they also work in Washington as well as New York. And so they've seen a lot of this as well, and kind of can bring a lot of that knowledge and experience with them as well as we look at this. So.
And Josh, the only thing I might add, again, I'm Carol Nealon with the Department of Climate Initiatives, is some of our neighboring jurisdictions have also been transitioning to an EUI pathway. So Denver, and then there's some others that are looking at that as well. And I think we'll want to do our best to be consistent with them to at least, drive more consistency in code application for designers and builders that are working across those jurisdictional boundaries.
Thank you. I know we talked a little bit about this previously, but as we look at energy, as we look at trying to reuse buildings, one of the things that I notice in my work is that when we start getting into level 3 alterations, that's where I start seeing people weigh really heavily whether it even makes sense to remodel, or where costs can go to the point where it financially isn't that different from tearing down and building new. Some of the things that can impact that are, zoning issues and things around that. Are we looking at trying to make any adjustments to make it easier to do retrofits from a zoning standpoint, as well as what kinds of targets we like, maybe lessening some of the targets for retrofits to make compliance paths easier?
I can't speak so much to the zoning side of it, but on the building side, I can say yes. I know that Rob and I have talked about that, and wanting to work with Landmark to make sure that, or Landmark is one example, but in general, just existing buildings overall, to make sure that we understand, because like I said, the majority of the projects and the permits that we see that come through the city are really existing buildings now. And so we want to look at that really and analyze that to make sure that, we're living up to the city's goals and visions, but to make sure, like what you're saying is we want them to retain the structure if possible, you know, and where it makes sense, because that's kind of back to the embodied carbon piece. It's going to be more painful to really tear it down and bring in all new materials versus retaining the current structure and what's there. And so I guess for a long answer to a short question, from building code, yeah, we're going to be looking to update the existing building piece to make sure that it's not as, we don't want to push people away either to do the work without a permit or to just not do it, you know, so that we want to really look at that and really weigh that out, I think. So anyone else want to add anything to that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job of touching on it. I think with our past code update, we didn't look at zoning specifically. In the residential code, we did make the decision not to make the adjustment we had planned for the alterations. There's and I think it's currently you know, just a different ERI target. I think one of the things we want to explore in this code update is like how much of that makes a difference, and that was some of the feedback we got from planning board as well. Is what we currently have actually driving that retention, or are there learnings that we have? Because that was certainly a deliberate effort on the residential side that we were making. We hadn't yet really explored it on the commercial, but that's certainly something we would look at as well.
Thank you. And then in terms of like Brad, maybe you could also touch on, you know, are there anything we could look at in terms of easing some of the hoops that people have to jump through in order to go through that retrofit process? You know, I'm thinking about adding insulation on a building that's near its setbacks and requiring, you know, zoning adjustments or various things like that, or if there are any additional areas like that that we might be looking into with this.
I appreciate the question, Councilmember. I have to admit that yesterday's conversation was really my first introduction to the idea that there may be zoning kind of aspects that interplay with the broader goals that are being addressed in part by the energy code updates that we'd committed to working on. But we definitely see, as Carolyn indicated, that that there is that relationship, and that has been looked at in the past, and we certainly will commit to looking at that, you know, moving forward. I am still building kind of a comprehensive understanding of climate initiatives goals, broader goals in that regard, and can't speak to really what scope that kind of implies, and probably would rely a little bit on Jonathan's history to speak to that. If I can put you on the spot, Jonathan, with that question.
Sure, Brad. Good to see you all. Council Jonathan Cohen with the Climate Initiatives Department. Yeah, I think that this is a really interesting question that you raise, Councilmember Folkerts. This is, I think, a great opportunity for the departments to come together and kind of think about the synergies between where we're trying to go and look at the full package of tools that we have. So, you know, tonight we're talking about the energy code. We should be thinking about when and where do we implement some of the changes in the building code, and as you bring forward now, how we think about the zoning to address some of the challenges that we're facing in the community, and again, to align around this issue of climate and resilience. So I think this is a really interesting dimension to add into the project, and I would just suggest or perhaps ask that the staff team take that back and think about what is the holistic and more comprehensive approach that could include some of the zoning, some of the buildings, some of the energy code updates, and think about that as a package.
And I'll just piggyback on one comment Jonathan just made too, about the relationship not only to the development code, zoning code, but also the building code. And we do have on a planned work schedule to update the building code here in the next year. And Rob, you might have a little more precise information of that you could share, if you would, please.
Yeah, we're looking at adopting the 2024 I-codes when they should be published by January, so we'll be able to start working that early next year. We'll be looking at how that integrates with all the other land use and energy codes that we have adopted currently, and parts of that, particularly the embodied carbon piece, might be impacted by the building code, particularly the IBC adoption.
Thanks.
And related, as we, we talked about this a little bit also, that sort of the changes in building technologies are pushing forward products like foam insulation and things like that we use to meet our energy code requirements, but that those products can cause consequences when it comes to deconstruction, making the wood products that would otherwise be recyclable not recyclable anymore. I know that you guys are also looking at an update around that code, around the deconstruction code. Would that kind of ensuring that buildings are designed for disassembly or recyclability maybe be part of that, or this work, or the building code work?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, Lauren, and definitely we did have a chance to kind of check in with our circular economy team, and they're doing some good working groups right now around the deconstruction to learn more about where the successes and challenges are coming, and using that to inform some best practices. There's a lot of analysis that needs to be done, but I definitely think we want to start to take some steps in that direction, and I think it sits very well with what Rob said, is certainly as we're looking at the IBC update, thinking about things like class 4 shingles, restrictions on the types of insulation, those types of things would be really well suited as part of that. As part of this project, we are doing a broader roadmap around our codes, and so we're also wanting to reflect that and make sure that we're putting the things in the energy code that we can that also support that.
Thank you. That's it for the moment.
Mayor.
Yeah, thanks for the very detailed presentation, Josh. I can tell how well you know this stuff. It's very impressive. I just had one question, which was, I noticed a difference in what you were talking about than what I remember from the presentation. And it was a difference to my thoughts, a positive one, but just wanted to check in, which was about the electric vehicle charging stations. And I think in our packet, it talked about a minimum of, I think 25 units before you would apply a 10% standard. And I think I heard you saying 15 or 16. And just, can you clarify that this is a little different from what's in the packet, and just address that real quickly, please?
Yes. If I remember correctly, we were talking, yes, so we're talking about the EV piece, and we were looking at the parking slots. Basically, what we were trying to do is align it with the state, what the state's currently requiring, because I know that they've tightened that down. And so the intent was to look at starting where the state's requiring it and then building off of it there. If that answers the question. Carolyn, I think you might.
Yeah, and I think what we put in the packet is where we are today, and we neglected to put where we think we're totally going to. And so the main changes is, I think as Josh mentioned, we currently define small lots as 25 and under, and the state's going to define it as 10 and under, which, and then I think the other thing we've talked about is setting a different definition around multifamily of 10 and under, recognizing that the needs are there. That's some of the feedback we've heard. And then I think we anticipate, based on feedback we're gathering through planning board, EAB, and this conversation, then continuing to up whether it's some of the, just conduit install and other things. So what you saw in the packet is kind of the starting place. It's not intended to be the ending place.
Great, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, I just, well, while we're on the topic, I'll just say it sounds like going more in that direction, state level is the right approach, that we'd be increasing the EV requirements for those developments between 10 and 25 units, or spaces, 10, 25 spaces. That sounds like a great idea. So I'm glad you're moving more in that direction. That's my only question. Thanks.
Matt, and then I will have a couple of questions of my own.
Appreciate that, Mark, and thank you guys for really detailed work. I mean, this is good stuff in a lot of ways. So I'm glad we're embarking on that. I was just going to maybe piggyback a little bit on what Aaron was saying about EV stuff, and the fact that even though the state's sort of targeting 15, that's based on really a state average, and we know pretty clearly that Boulder far exceeds that state average. So as we're looking at that, take the state and then add 10% kind of thing. I hope that's kind of where we're looking. So thinking that we don't come back to these for about 5 years, my hope is that we will take the state and be pretty aggressive beyond that, knowing that we're building infrastructure that kind of hangs. So I'm just want to make sure, are we thinking that kind of level of exceeding state? I'm not, exact percentage, but really trying to go above and beyond, knowing that we won't come back to this for 5 years.
I think that's the intent, yeah, is that we're really going to look at pushing the envelope on it. And also we're trying to be thoughtful on it to make sure that, it's in certain building types, and that, maybe if it's a retail space with one spot out front, they may not have to have it, because we don't want someone, clogging up that one spot for the whole day charging their car. But, with multifamily, I think there's a huge need for it. And I think really that we can really make strides in different areas and really live up to kind of the intent and the vision of what Boulder wants, by also appeasing what the state does, I want to say blowing it out of the water, but that's from my background, so I apologize.
No, we should be blowing all of these
Amen.
things out of the water. So let's do that. I know that that's where Jonathan likes to live. He likes to set the bar high.
Live dangerously.
That's right.
And Matt, having had the privilege of actually being on the state energy code board, I can attest that that really was a consideration, right? That state minimum has to consider rural areas and other areas, and so we're very familiar with how those got set, and we definitely, those are the baseline, but there's some great starting points for us as well.
Fantastic. My other question centered around kind of just the incentives on how we get people to these targets, and maybe not get them there, but also, like we just say, blow them out of the water. How do we get, when we're thinking about developments, how do we get people to exceed them? And so I'm kind of curious about or have we thought about tiers of these codes, so that there's if you hit the gold tier, there's these sorts of benefits that come from it, whether it be community benefits or trade-offs, or if it's the silver tier. Have we thought about doing that, so that, again, as people are looking to build multifamily housing or anything, they have a clear sense of, all right, I'm going to do the baseline, I'm not going to get much, but if I really want to go there, I can kind of quickly do my evaluating of opportunity cost of what does that really then equate and get me? Is it, not having to do site review? Is it, is it just all of those little things that we've discussed? I'm just wondering how we can leverage the energy code to drive some of those incentives to the things that we know we want in our community, and not now, but 20 years down the road.
Sure, no, definitely. And not so much on the terms of the EV side of it, but we were talking about it a little bit earlier. And as Councilmember Folkerts mentioned earlier, with regards to exterior insulation, right? What we can try to do is look to incentivize maybe someone that, well, instead of using exterior insulation, that's this poly ISO board that always ends up in the landfill, why not use maybe Roxol or something that's going to be a little bit less embodied carbon, more forgiving on the environment, but there is going to be an increased cost for that. And so our turn would be, well, we'll give you a 5% allowance on your target that you're trying to hit, but try to lead with a carrot and kind of get them to really do the right thing. But, on their own accord, because a lot of the times we've talked about it, it's like when you try to push and push things upon people, you're going to get higher resistance. And so when you have options that are available too on the table, they feel like they have more of a selection on the path they can go, and they're more apt to do the right thing, I think, too. But I think that's really something we're looking at is, as I mentioned, on the single family side, there are incentives that are available. And then I know that there was some discussion on the possibility of, with larger homes, look at maybe having them subsidized for the smaller homes to make sure that everyone has access to energy efficiency, and they have the money that's available. Let's put it to use, and put it to use in a good way. So
I appreciate that, but maybe my question was really thinking bigger than just staying within the energy framework in terms of if you go above and beyond, maybe we give you height variance, right? Sure. I mean, I really, and I see Brad starting to wince a little at that one. But that's where I want to think of think more holistically about the whole built environment and how we can create those trade-offs in other forms. And I know we talked in email, maybe there's things we do on the parking front that then are tied to, are we doing gas or electric appliances? So I'm just thinking think bigger in terms of how we can leverage those things without being, and just thinking bigger in those sorts of incentives and trade-offs might be a way for us to leverage more of what we want to get in our community.
So yeah, maybe I'll take a swag at that one. So just a reminder, we did earlier this year, or late last year, earlier this year, we did bring the community benefits project forward, and we do have an energy related criteria within that. Right now it's a % improvement in EUI. certainly as we learn from that, I think there's opportunity to allow for other above and beyonds. I think all the other above and beyonds, we heard from council that you want to be the base code. And so those are the things that are showing up here, but definitely something we can learn from through this process and maybe bring back with some other strategies, but do know that there is an above and beyond energy related component in the current community benefit site review criteria update process. Yeah.
Appreciate the reminder, Carolyn. Thank you.
And just to clarify, if I can piggyback, Councilman, no wincing for sure. Actually, more recognizing as this conversation and conversations leading up to this evening's study session really reinforces, I think, the interconnectivity as we get into a broader and more aggressive vision even than historically, how that really does imply the interconnectivity of all these different codes and all the different tools that we need to exercise. And so, as a relatively newcomer to all this, I've really appreciated our opportunity to have a partnership with Climate Initiatives. And Jonathan and I, not to get off on a tangent too much, but Jonathan and I have talked in the last 6 months about ways to strengthen that and operationalize that even more than in the past. So if that looked like wincing, I apologize.
No, I was only just putting you on the spot a little bit, Brad.
No.
But thank you for that. So those are my questions. I appreciate it.
Okay, seeing none others, I will have a couple. To some extent, there's an inherent tension between the affordability of housing and the technologies you want us to adopt for greater energy efficiency and conservation. Are you being mindful of those costs? Not so much with respect to large 100-unit developments, but I'm thinking of the 1,400 square foot home somewhere in Martin Acres. To what extent are you impacting the price of being able to renovate that home with some of these new requirements? I would assume there's some impact here. I know you say that there are incentives that are available. That's what you said in the slide, but is it to what extent are we actually imposing additional expense for the homes that are likely to be, at least in their present condition, the most affordable in the community?
So thank you very much for that question. And that is something I want to say that hits a little close to home to me too, because I live in Firestone. I can't afford to live in Boulder. And so the equity piece and making sure that it's available to everyone and really analyzing the technology that's out there and making sure that it's available and wanting to be aware of the cost impacts as well is really something that we want to dig into and understand, because, like I mentioned, there are incentives that are available, but the other thing too is that the zero energy ready home is going to be a lot cheaper from the reports I've seen to do versus a zero energy home. And the main point really there is it's the zero energy home or zero energy ready home really is a starting point to get you to zero energy. And so with our consultant Noresco, I know that they've done a ton of work on research across the country in these in this spectrum as well. And so as of right now, I don't have an answer for you, but we can definitely, that's going to be something we dig into and understand, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that, like I said, it's energy efficiency for everyone, not just the folks that can afford it, honestly. So
thank you. I hope you'll be mindful of that.
Definitely.
My second question is as follows. I was emailing with Council Member Folkerts earlier today, and it turns out we both have some interest in the technology of cross-laminated timber. Have you considered that as a technology that we ought to be encouraging in the city of Boulder? And it comes out of, I believe, Scandinavia. It's been used in buildings up to 10 or 12 stories, so it's clearly applicable to the height of our buildings here. And it has been advertised as containing much, much less embedded carbon than buildings constructed with steel and concrete. Is that any component of what you're looking at?
I think that would be something that we would never turn away. If someone brought that to our attention and wanted to use that as an item, I don't foresee that as being a roadblock. It would just be a different approach to what we normally see for building, right? And so the other thing too, to really look at those as we kind of delve down the avenue of embodied carbon is, you know, that's one of the pieces that we really kind of have to analyze on more of the single family side is availability. You know, we love to have some of these big timber projects and these cross laminated timbers that are readily available. If you're trucking it in, you know, you've got to kind of look at the analysis of, you know, with the embodied carbon aspect and bringing it in, you know, what's the impact there? And luckily it does have a lower embodied carbon because of it being a wood product. But I believe that, you know, from our perspective, I don't think we would turn down. I think Rob and I were talking about some of the timber buildings that are going up around the country and how it would be neat to see that here in Boulder. And so I think that this would be something that I think that if this was brought to our attention, I think that we would try to do what we could to foster it through to make sure that it would be an option to build at, you know, with those materials. We would never stop someone and say, no, you can't use that.
I guess my question is, would you go further and try to incentivize people to do that?
I think that kind of leads back to where we were talking about with looking at, you know, incentivizing to move away from like insulation and that. And so I think that that's something we could definitely consider, honestly. So thank you for that feedback. That's
yeah. And can I jump in on that one?
Absolutely.
So like Mark was saying, there's not only does that reduce carbon emissions, but the wood actually sequesters carbon, right? So you could, with switching from a steel or concrete building to a heavy timber build, you know, assuming you're looking at sustainably forested woods and all of that, it might actually have such a significant offset in the amount of carbon that it's storing that you could be actually making the building carbon negative, and even carbon negative after a significant amount of operational energy goes into, you know, heating and cooling it. So I think I would like to see us really look hard at how the energy code and what kinds of targets for embodied carbon we might look at, because just, again, the potential impact is so big. And so could we look at not having restrictive energy requirements on a building that's doing something that is so transformational like that?
No, I think that's a valid. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, you're fine. I was just going to say, we are starting to see some of these mass timber buildings appearing in the United States. They really originated in Scandinavia. They're still very new. So there isn't, as far as I'm aware, in the IBC really a prescriptive pathway to construct them. But that doesn't stop anyone building them. There's alternative means and methods approvals. They would have to be engineered structures, but most large commercial buildings are engineered anyway. So it's certainly a possibility to build one in Boulder. I think right now, probably the biggest disincentive is just the cost and the newness of the technology. But we'll definitely take it into consideration, the embodied carbon. I think that's really valuable feedback and something we can work with moving forward on this.
Yeah, and if I could I just reflect back to Councilmember Folkerts and Councilmember Wallach? I think one of the things I'm hearing, I want to just make sure, I think what I'm hearing is can we explore strategies, for example, alleviating EUI requirements, and also ensuring that any of our like envelope requirements or others aren't prohibitive, as a means within the energy code to encourage people to bring forward lower embodied carbon materials. And yes. I think very much that is something that is on our plan, and this is good feedback to know that that's a good direction for us to head.
Yes, I would urge you to do that. I think there's a really promising technology there, and if it's endorsed by Councilmember Folkerts, she knows. And I was a mere builder, but she knows. So I would urge you to take a close look at that. All right, seeing no further questions, are there any other comments? Mayor?
Great. Well, again, a big kudos and thank you to all the hard work that's gone into this. It's incredibly detailed and really good steps forward that we're looking at taking. My one piece of feedback that I want to give, well, first of all, I really like where Lauren was going with that, and that Mark as well, that to consider those allowances for much lower embodied carbon materials. So just a +1 on the investigation of those ideas. But the other one is I would really like to see us move to adopt an approach similar to what Crested Butte and Denver are doing, which is the all electric requirements for new construction. I think we only revise our codes every few years, and I think now is a good time to be bold with of course, the scope of the climate crisis that's upon us. And so the buildings, of course, that we build now will be with us for decades. So it seems like it's a good time to start making those requirements to be all electric. So I know there's some nuances to that, things like, potential exemption for a commercial kitchen and things like that. But I also know other people in other jurisdictions have thought these through. So I would really appreciate if you could bring us back when we get to these codes, an option or simply just something that implements an all electric requirement for new construction with reasonable carve outs. So wanted to get that out on the table and see if council might agree to giving that feedback in general.
All right. Nicole, then Lauren.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Wallach. I just wanted to echo, first of all, gratitude. Thank you for all this work that's gone into doing this. And I really like Lauren's ideas about thinking about other ways we can encourage people to reuse buildings through things like zoning changes. So would love to see that as well. This idea about thinking about now how we can be building in a way that anticipates future dismantling or reuse or recycling. I think that's a wonderful thing too, as well as this idea of embodied carbon, I think is absolutely a critical one for us to be thinking about. For me, it is really forward thinking. It is bold. It is the type of leadership that I would expect Boulder to be having on climate related issues. And one of the other things that I really like about it is that it's considering the impact that our city and what's happening in our city is having on other communities versus just thinking about what is happening here. So to the degree that we can incorporate things that will store carbon in the buildings, that will offset, or not offset, but reduce the carbon that's being emitted in the production, transportation, all of that in materials too. I think that's a really good thing. And I think I agree with Aaron's point about the moving toward all electric appliances and things in buildings. And I would also be interested in that intersection with the embodied carbon issue as well. So it'd be interesting just to see how those overlap. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren?
Thanks. And I really appreciate all of the thinking that you guys brought to this. The residential sort of net zero energy, going with a pathway that's more widely accepted and has opportunities for rebates, I think is a great idea. Doing the solar for commercial, I think in the way that you're thinking about it, and the potentially greenhouse gas offset requirements, I think makes a lot of sense. With the electric vehicle charging, especially for pre-wire, from what I've heard, it seems like we want to shift charging towards daytime charging, just in terms of grid capacity and storage and things like that for efficiency reasons. And so I question a little bit having the commercial requirements be so much lower than the residential on the pre-wire side, because if we're going to try and get people to charge during the day, I think we need to be ready with the infrastructure for that. And then for, as Aaron and Nicole talked about with the natural gas following Crested Butte in Denver, I think that would be a great direction for us to go in, and something I'd be excited to see. And like my hotline post talked about, please, let's do something on embodied carbon. I think that would be really important and transformational.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments for our presenters tonight? Once, twice, up, Mayor Brockett.
Well, Mayor Pro Tem, if you might indulge me, could I request a straw poll on the all electric requirement to see if that's a majority interest of council?
I have a question before you go to that straw poll.
Judy?
Yeah, my question is, I don't remember all the detail of that legislation. Is this something that we can do requiring 100%? Because I know there is a minimum requirement, but can we require 100%? Is that within?
So we can go higher than what was mandated by the state. We just have to meet the minimum of what the state model code says. In fact, we're encouraged to go beyond it.
Okay. And okay, my next question, well, you know what? I'll reserve the question. I think I want to make the comment, Aaron, as the mayor, I'll defer to you to make that request of 100%, but I think that should be vetted through with the chambers or other group in the community as well. But I will follow your lead on that one. Thank you.
And we'll definitely take that as a response on our question number 3 that we asked around engagement, because I think that's a really important point on that topic.
And if I could clarify, if you don't mind, Mark, this would not be a final decision, right? We're not making decisions tonight. It would be basically to show a majority will in council of having this be one of the things brought to us for final consideration and final adoption. So this would not be making a final decision. Obviously, the feedback from the community and stakeholders and technical input would be important as we move towards a final adoption in Q4.
And with that, let's take a straw poll. How many people are in favor of moving in the direction of requiring 100% electrification? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I am a partial yes. I would like to see more analysis on cost and impacts. But with that caveat, I would be 9 and so that's a very clear direction that we're taking. Giving.
Thanks for indulging me on that. I appreciate it.
Any other comments for this evening? We are at the end of our agenda. And I'm sorry, Nicole, I missed you.
It's okay. I was just, sorry, I was waiting for the engagement strategies and things with that. And, I know we talked a little bit about the business community, kind of builders reaching out there. I don't know what the right approach is for this. And so I will defer to our amazing engagement staff. But thinking about folks who are really impacted by the climate crisis, even here in our own community, how are we hearing from them? Because I also want to hear from them what it is that they're thinking about these strategies that we are taking to make things more energy efficient, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and kind of carbon that's out there in general. I would really love to hear from the people in our community who are on kind of the front lines of the climate crisis. And when I think about people like that, I think about the people who are living in really older housing stock that maybe don't have money to become more energy efficient. I think about folks who are kind of in places where, maybe they don't have air conditioning or some other source of keeping their space cool, those kinds of things. And just going to give that as a general thought. I expect that the engagement folks will be able to articulate better who those people are in our community, but people on the front lines of climate issues in our city.
Thank you. Lauren, you have a comment. Lauren,
I
then
just wanted to follow up on what Nicole said, because I think that, not only does that community, bear the brunt of climate change, but also that those houses are less likely to see the impact of our energy if they're not being remodeled or newly built, they're probably built to the oldest energy code, and there is the most potential if we can, you know, find a way to make it make sense to do these upgrades, that there would be big savings in operational energy. So understanding sort of what triggers and how we can help support the changes in that area, I think is really important.
Thank you. Tara, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, we're bringing you home. I'll shut my light and be in darkness, and that'll make everybody want to end quicker. No, just kidding. I would say that right now I'm thinking about empower our future. All those folks must be so excited from this conversation, waiting for this moment. And of course, I think, Stuart, if you're listening and out there, people who brought me to their homes when I was running for election and showed me their totally electric homes. So I'm hoping that the engagement we do is huge. All the people that have been waiting for this moment and have input. And that's how I feel about it. Thanks
Okay.
for putting up with my darkness.
And with that, I believe we have concluded our agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, Josh.
Sorry, sir. I just wanted to add one quick thing that I thought was pretty interesting in regards to the embodied carbon aspect. And our consultant actually brought this to my attention today, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sally, but there are 2 municipalities in the country that currently have embodied carbon written into their codes. One of them's in California, and the other one, I believe, is Denver's green code. And so this is something that if we look at doing, it would be something to pave the way, is what we're talking about with the city of Boulder. And so I just wanted to kind of mention that because I thought that was very interesting, and just to lead the conversation to where we understand that it's a newer technology. And I think that with a lot of that's going on in the development and the building industry in general, with these ESG or environmental, social, and governance requirements for these larger projects, I think that by us looking at embodied carbon and these other aspects with energy efficiency, I really think it's going to help these other entities really meet their goals and their requirements. Because I've seen a lot newer ones coming from outside of the state. The SEC has certain strict requirements on developers that they have to show green programs and what they're doing on their end. And so I think by us leading the charge here in Boulder, it's going to help them. And there'll be some pain at the beginning, because there always is. But I think over the time, they'll learn to appreciate really kind of what we're trying to do here and really trying to move the needle. So, and thank you very much for that time.
Good. Nuria.
I was just going to say, Mayor Pro Tem, that I really thank you and the council for this conversation. I believe staff has what they need, but what I really wanted to lift up was, I hope you see in staff the passion for some of the work that you're talking about already. It's a matter sometimes of timing and doing them as we're continuing to learn about more strategies, but the invitation to continue to talk to us about what you're hearing that's new out in community or out in the world is really great. So please continue to share that passion as we move forward. This team, I know, is so singularly focused on moving things that really mitigate and are thoughtful about our sort of war with climate change as we're moving forward in many different ways. And it's an amazing team that is really at the, I think, at the cutting edge of a lot of the work that is happening nationally, and know that they want to receive that as we move forward. And the other thing I'll note, and I appreciate the thoughts about those that are most burdened by climate change, as we also think about costs that could be incurred, that know that this team thinks about that, and that as we're thinking about it, we're really making sure that we're doing no harm as we move forward, and yet advancing the initiatives that we need to be, that we know to be true, to really addressing the climate crisis of the moment. And so I just wanted to thank you for this thoughtful conversation and lift up how your passion really does match the passion of staff who is trying to advance this work forward as well.
It has indeed been a very substantive and interesting conversation. I look forward to your further work on it. And as I will no longer be recognizing raised hands, and as we have completed our agenda for this evening, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned at the time of 9:43. Have a good recess all. Don't get into too much trouble, and we'll see you all again in July.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Mark, for a good meeting.
Have a great evening.
All right, thank you.